Hibiru race, not even the Hebrew race, but all of the Hibiru race and the Hyksos race, which are both Illuminati-based races, have literally overtaken and moved themselves into power positions all along. They have since Atlantis, into power positions within the Hebrew human race. And they've literally taken over the identity of them by telling the Hebrews that they're this, 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 and this, and having the Hebrews worship Anunnaki gods when they don't know they're doing that. Hebrew people, Jewish people, were angelic human. It was an angelic human magi line. So there's been all this confusion going on. It's really important that just because doves are sweet and pretty and seem to represent peace, we start to realize that some of these teachings, some of our favorite teachings in the New Age, were not done for the purposes we think they were. Now, they got us certain frequencies. They did bring frequencies to us as we read these things. Frequencies activated. That's good. Because even if they activated to begin with on a reverse, which most of those things, if they're doing DNA activation or any of that, it will be activating your DNA by having the fire letters or little scalar patterns actually activate in reverse sequence, which creates a reversal in your whole body template. But once you learn, if you go up to an 11-strand reverse matrix, if you learn how to use your Merkaba the right way and to use D12 frequency, you can take all that activation and then start running it the right way. So they actually did you a favor, even though it wasn't meant as a favor originally. Okay. Now, the Jehovah Anunnaki they for a long time ran their own agenda, didn't want to deal with anybody else, and they started making deals as we moved into the time frame we're going to talk about when we get into the list that I just handed out to you, where the list of events. They had to make deals because there were certain groups that were getting too powerful, so they had to counterbalance that. It has been ridiculous what has happened since 1916 up to this point. It's like, change your partner, do-si-do. Everybody's doing a square dance here, and they're literally, first they're on their own, then they're going to side with this guy, no, then they go over here, then they're going to make this deal, no, they're going to break that deal. It's been crazy, and our politics have actually reflected it. Our global politics have always been a reflection of what's going on with these behind-the-scene world management team forces. Now, another group that's a riot, the Toth Enki Zephelium Anunnaki. Okay? Now, the Toth Enki Anunnaki are affiliated with the guy Toth, and all those teachings. The Paracletes are affiliated with that. There's all sorts of different groups that are teaching Toth stuff. Drunvalo's teaching Toth stuff. Altan Melchizedek is teaching Toth stuff. Now, it doesn't mean Drunvalo or Altan are negative people. It means they should aim higher with their teachers. Because right now, the Toth group has gone into the United Resistance. And I'm sure they haven't told the people they're working with anything about any of that. Now, some of them know more about it than you might want to know. And I won't get into how much the teachers know about what's really going on. But what's important is to realize that these are the groups that are, when we go to workshops in the New Age movement, when we're adopting new healing systems, when we're playing with this New Age stuff that's teaching us how to do spiritual development, or when we're going back to our old traditional religious stuff, every one of those paradigms comes from one of these matrices or one of the good ones. Okay? They don't just happen to come. They don't just evolve out of human consciousness and plop, there's a book and all of a sudden people are following it and it's a movement. These all have agendas behind them, and they're either Christos agendas or they're anti-Christos agendas. And it's very difficult because they all use sweet language. In fact, a lot of people pick on us because, well, where's the love? And talk about, oh, beloveds, it's so good to see you today. Did you ever read Galactic Federation stuff? Gag me. I mean, it's so sweet. Just, oh, and you are beloveds, and they give you this flowery, poetic, we just love you so much, whack. It's like, watch that knee, because the knee is coming as they're patting you on the head. Ours has always been very direct, and the love is obviously there. Somebody loves us enough to bring this information back here. We love people enough to stick our head on the line and come out and teach it. But these guys will use, the Jehovah Anunnaki are very good at the light, love, open the heart, just love you to death thing. But so are the Toth Enki groups. Now, we get into the names, you'll find as we go to the Anunnaki races, we have Enki, Enlil, and Marduk. Now, those names, if anybody knows anything about Sumerian history, These were the Sumerian gods. Yes, well, the Sumerians thought they were gods because they had their memory wiped out. That was after the flood period, after the DNA messes had been done. So they had come in and presented themselves, the different groups had come in and presented themselves as their gods. And because they had scrambled the DNA, they'd scrambled the language patterns, so they taught them reverse matrix languages, like the one we're using right now. But right now, if we tried to speak in a normal, a natural founder's language, it wouldn't make any sense. In fact, the bodies that we have right now would have a very difficult time making the sound tones. Literally, we've been put back together, upside down and reversed, compared to what we're supposed to be. But we'll progressively be able to heal that and incorporate what we have, but into the Christos pattern. Like, we'll start to understand the founders' languages, which means we'll start to be able to pick up those frequencies as they're coming down, through the atmosphere, literally. So we'll be able to hear our own souls a little more clearly and our own avatars a little more clearly. The Thoth Enki groups have they tend to, they're like the cosmic network team. They get along with just about anybody if it could serve them to do so. And then when they don't need you anymore, they kind of go and do something else. Well, the Thoth Enki group, they're part of the group that has a very, very powerful system that was put in before most of these other APIN systems. The system is called the NDC grid, which is the Nibiru and Diotic crystal grid. That we got into this in the Kauai workshop, and that Templar book has an explanation of it in more detail. It involves a thing called the Nibiruan battle star, which is called wormwood. Another Bible reference. Wormwood comes and crashes down on the rivers of the earth and makes them bitter. Yeah. Okay, there's a battle star that's an artificial, it's a piece of a planet that was hijacked and put into a strange reverse orbit with a planet that used to be in our galaxy called Nibiru. Nibiru's orbit was literally ripped out of its natural orbit with the rest of our planets, and it dips in and out of Phantom Matrix every 3,657.8 years, I believe. I think that number's right. It's 3,600 something. I think it's 30, what I just said. Sometimes the facts will come real fast. They're all written down, though. This stuff is in that book, and there's more of it going to be in some of the other books that are coming. But the Nibiru Diotic crystal grid has given this particular group of Anunnaki, the Thoth Enki group, the Enlil Odedicron group, and the Marduk Luciferian group. Not this one, but the one that's on the next page. These are the Luciferian Anunnaki that did the Luciferian covenant. There's also the Palladian Samjaze Luciferian group that's also on the other page. These guys got this technology in here. It used to be a set of these huge pylon crystals that were kind of like on the picture in the front of this book. You can see this is a picture Leela brought to us. She actually went here to see these things. If anybody doesn't have this, see that big white streak going up there? And that little kind of person-shaped thing below it? That gives you an idea of what these massive crystal rods look like. This was one that was a cave of them that was found in the Chihuahua, New Mexico, Mexico area. And these were always part of the ancient technologies, the crystalline technologies. So the Nibiru Diotic crystal grid was put in, it was linked into Earth's grids, into parallel Earth's grids, and it was a complex system of sonics. It created a standing scalar sonic wave form that linked into Wormwood, the artificial planet, which linked into Nibiru in the Phantom Matrix. It was their galactic patrol. They would come through every 3,600 and some years, and that's when they would usually come to visit. And what they would do with this was they would control and program the Earth's grids. This is how our DNA got ripped apart. Because what they did was block out certain parts of the frequencies that would naturally run through each level of the planet. We have what we call axiotonal lines in the planet. They're the main energy run lines that come off stargates. When we're not in a stellar activation cycle, they run the subharmonics of, like I say, if you have gate 5 is not open, but axiotonal line will run subharmonic 5 of dimension 1, 2, and 3. So there's this correspondence with literally every dimensional frequency has its corresponding anchoring place in the planetary grids. What they did with the Nibiru Diotic crystal grid was they created something called the checkerboard matrix. They turned some of them off, and they left some of them on. They reversed some other ones. This did the same thing in our body templates and shredded the heck out of our DNA. This is how we went from being a variable base species on this planet to everybody having a base 4 chemical genetic gene code, to where we had once upon a time 12 strands that were activated chemically. We had literally a base 12. Humans had a base 12. Some of the indigos had a base 48 gene code. Okay, so what they did with these technologies, these are why when, there's like fantasy books out there that kind of speculate about Atlantean technologies and what they might have been like. These were mega technologies. These were technologies that would be like somebody from Earth being able to control what happens on, say, planets 2 billion light years away without even ever visiting them, by sending waveforms. It's controlled waveform technology. And what we do with electromagnetics here is just the beginning. They're dealing with something called myon, dion, and trion fields. These are words. This is the level of understanding the physics of this that we were just given in the Sarasota workshop recently. These are the level. These myons, dions, and trions are ultramicro subatomic particle things that form subatomic particles. Like what makes a quark? They talk about these little tiny minute things called quarks in physics. Well, there's something that forms a quark, something smaller than a quark that forms a quark. These things are myons, dions, and trions. They're a stage between the template stuff that we've talked about in Cathara. We talk about it, the particae, particae, and particum waveforms, the standing scalar waves that form the templates of matter. Then it goes through up to this myon, dion, and trion level. This is where we get a type of technology that has the ability to control the way protons, electrons, neutrons, and all those other things our science has identified, a way to control how they behave with each other, what their angular rotation of particle spin is, what's contained in the nucleus of cells, what's contained outside, how many electrons to how many protons. When you get into this level of technology, it's just mind-blowing compared to what our technologies down here are based on. The Nibiruan dotted crystal grid was used to turn this into a slave planet since 25,500 BC, and that's precisely what it's been. There were still enough of us functional in the Atlantean period where we were rebelling against it, and the founders were trying to get in here, working with the indigos, working with the humans, to get rid of this monstrosity installment that was in the area we call Stonehenge now. The Stonehenge rocks, the original set of them, were put in after the Guardian groups got these towers, these towering selenite crystal rods out, but they were put in to block the same positions. That's why Stonehenge was round. It was a little different shaped when it was originally done. Now, the stones with the crossbars served to do something. They weren't able to get the installation, the matching installation, out of parallel Earth. So the Nibiruans were still controlling here through parallel Earth. They were sending it up through the grids from the connection of Earth here up into, the connection between Earth and parallel. What Stonehenge, as we know it, emerged from was taking large rocks and making conduits that would send the energy. It would come up in the grids, and it would send it back down over the crossbar and down back in. So it would go back to where it came from. So it didn't program the grids here. But there was constantly fighting and warring. One of our groups would put them up, put the stones up, and the other guys would come in and knock them down or take the crossbars off them. Because if they don't have the crossbars, they still run the frequency into this, into Earth's template here. So the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid just gave the Anunnaki races a hold on here. They were progressively able to block out Guardian race, like being able to come in and intervene. Yes? Okay. It's reminding me it's 7:15. Since it's 7:15, we can do dinner at 7. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, Nibiruan dotted crystal grid, 25,500 BC, beginning of major problems. Okay. Then, with the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid, they created something. Anunnaki created something called the net. Now, the net, think about internet, because it's kind of like that, but it's a little different. The net is, what do they say? Nibiruan electrostatic transduction field. That's where they get net, N-E-T. When you translate it into English, net is a good word to call it, because it's the Nibiruan electrostatic transduction field. It's another one of these nasty little technologies that you could use nicely if you wanted to. They've literally been able to seal the frequencies, literally put us in a frequency bubble where guardian races progressively could not get through the net to communicate here or to get their ships in here. This net has been a nemesis to our planet since 25,500 BC. It's also how they broadcast stuff. The net is linked through the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid into natural configurations called crystal temple networks. there's 24 primary crystal temple networks in the planetary grids that were always there. Way back in seeding 1, millions of years ago, when Nibiru at the time was under Emerald Covenant protection, and they were trying to work with the Anunnaki races who were trying to be supposedly nice at the time, there were something called Nibiruan crystal rods put into these 24 primary areas of crystalline caverns. They created a communication system, and it was used for interplanetary communication, and it was used to generate certain types of energy, and it made a link to Nibiru. Well, when they put the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid in the third seeding in 25,500 BC, they wired it in to this old communication network, and they got control of the 24 primary bases. They're literally crystal temples, like in the picture that's on the front of that. I don't have the other pictures of it that Leela had, but they're gorgeous. These are massive crystalline caves filled with selenite rods and some others. Once they had control of those, they had control of Earth's planetary Templar grids, which means they could control what frequency was going to run in the grids, and they would also be able to control what the stargates did once a stellar activation cycle happened. What they planned to do, that was 25,500 BC when they got all this mess set up. What they planned to do, the next stellar activation cycle from that point was supposed to be in 22,326 BC. They were going to do their final takeover then and bring the whole thing down into Phantom Matrix then. But our guys stopped it. They were able to do, I don't know what they did, but they did something with the gates, with Sirius B, Gate 6, that shut down the stellar activation cycle before it fully commenced. Because once it starts to commence and you get one of the gates fully open, you can't stop it, or it can actually rip the grids apart, not just create pole shift. There was a partial pole shift during that period of time, and because we got attacked. I mean, we were coming in to do the Christos mission to get that finalized. They were coming in to make sure we got sucked down into the Phantom Matrix, and the whole thing got put on hold. It created a stalemate. This would all be resolved during the next stellar activation cycle. The next stellar activation cycle that would come due is now 2000 to 2017. So we've had these messes to deal with. Then in 10,500 BC, various other ones started to put in the APIN systems, which would tap in. They made the wormholes in 10,500 BC. This is when they literally made wormholes, or let's say made doorways through that wall in time that I talked about. They ripped holes in the wall in time, wormholes, so they could start, so the different groups could start coming back and forth. They made the two wormholes. That's when the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid system in the net became just one of the problems. Once the wormholes were in, all these APIN systems were put in, and they were like little landmines waiting to go off in the next stellar activation cycle. These are literally planted in our grids, and they are starting to activate because we're in a stellar activation cycle. What we've seen in the last, since 1916, has been a progressive covert war over whose APIN system was going to activate, therefore who was going to control the planetary grids when the stargates started to open. Okay, the Thoth Enki group these guys are interesting. They're part of the Anu Seraphim. Now, we talked about Anu Elohim, which are the Jehovian Anunnakis, are pure strain Anu Elohim. Anu Seraphim means they were Anunnaki that hybridized with some of the draconian races from the fallen Seraphim group. So they're part Anu Elohim and part Anu Seraphim. So they call them and part fallen Seraphim. So they call them Anu Seraphim. The Anunnaki races that are affiliated with this line were their natural body form was an aquatic ape. That means they could breathe land. They were like a land or water ape. They could breathe water as well. The Thoth group, the Thoth Enki group, were hybridized with the Zeta, which are the Zeta regalian insectoid reptilian things. It's like when you look at a regalian, they're basically insectoid reptilian serpent template. That's what that race is, if you were going to try to describe what it is. So the Thoth Enki groups are the aquatic ape plus that Zeta insectoid reptilian serpent thing. They had their APN system that was called the Serpent, that runs literally down the East Coast and down Central America and down into South America. All right, these guys were they were involved with all sorts of stuff. If we go back in Egyptian history, these were the guys who did the Sirius, Isis, Horus Egyptian lines. Most of our Egyptian history isn't human history. This is about the Leviathan races being controlled by the fallen angelic races who came in and took over the non-dynastic kings, because the whole dynasty system, the way it was structured in Egypt, was a total Anunnaki construct. there had been people, the Magi King lines, that were there before. And Imhotep was actually like one of the last ones that actually had a name that you might recognize from somewhere. He was not just an architect. He was actually he was a king, and he was taken over by Djoser. That's when the invasions really started to pick up. So when you look at our wonderful, everybody goes, oh, we need Egyptian history, and because we all have a feel that we might have a part of ourselves there. And there's just like this romanticism about it. If we only knew, it's not half as romantic as we might think. When we think about, good old, Osiris and Isis and Horus, and we study maybe the ancient mystical teachings of Isis and the girls of Isis, who are these people? They're Anunnaki. Okay, these guys are associated with the Thoth schools, the Paracletes, the Atlanteans, the Alpha Omega Order, Melchizedek. There's a whole bunch of them that are actually working with the other Alpha Omega guys that are from Alpha Omega Centauri, the Necromaton. These guys work with the Necromaton. They also work with just about anybody that it's convenient to work with at the time to get them where they want to. Now, there's another group called the Enlil Odedicron Anunnaki. The Thoth group are from Nibiru, so are the Enlil Odedicron Anunnaki. The Enlil Odedicron Anunnaki are different shaped. They have the aquatic ape Anunnaki base, but they also have the avian reptile form. So their coding is a little bit different. It's not the Zeta form. It's the Odedicron avian reptile form. These guys are from Nibiru and also Tiamat. Okay, if we're going to go, most of these are located on Nibiru now, and Nibiru is the one that dips in and out of the Phantom Matrix because they have it on an artificial orbit. There's also a planet called Tiamat that was a piece of Terra, our density 2 level of Earth, that got blown off 550 million years ago, and they hijacked it and took it into Phantom, and they named it Tiamat. This is why they like to tell us, Earth used to be part of our planet Tiamat. It's like, not exactly. Tiamat used to be part of our planet Terra in density 2. So that if you read any of the stuff that comes out from the Pleiadian, Nibiru, and Anunnaki, they'll give you this whole line of nonsense, and they'll use words like this, but they'll tell you that they created you. It's not the truth. All right, so these guys work together most of the time. The Thoth Enki group and the Enlil Odedicron group, they're associated with Nibiru, Tiamat, and a place called Avion, Lyra. They were the ones that had been involved 250 billion years ago, where their original founders groups had gotten twisted, and they were from the Gate 11 planet, Avion in Lyra. And they're the ones that blew up Stargate 12, and it almost took this whole time matrix down 250 billion years ago. Okay, these are these guys. That Avion Lyra association is their highest level of D11 frequency, where they're attached to Gate 11. They have some of the Gate 11 codes. This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to take over this time matrix in the Phantom on reverse from Gate 11 on down, where they control the Templar, but it won't have 12 stargates. It will only have 11. That's where they're trying to sever the natural creation currents. Okay, you have Thoth Enki Zephelium, Enki Enlil Odedicron. These guys used to fight with each other over Egypt, and there were certain periods of time they raided Egypt, and they were trying to mine gold here. And they used to get in fights with each other because nobody wanted to work as the slaves in the mines. That's where they came up with the idea of making the Neanderthals. But then we have another group called the Marduk-Satane Draman Anunnaki. Now, the Marduk Anunnaki are another group that originally started from Nibiru. They have the aquatic ape base, which is where all of these Nibiru and Anunnaki groups have the base aquatic ape, but then they're combined with other things. These guys combine with the Omicron Draconians, the dragon moths. They run a draconian agenda as opposed to an Anunnaki agenda. The Satane is a family line. That's where we got the concept of Satan. That's where that comes from. And Lucifer came from the same place, and they're not the same people. Then there's some teachings, the Thoth teachings will teach you that Lucifer and Satan were two different people. They'll still put them in the context of the mythology, but they tend to make a difference, a distinction, where Satan was one person or nasty angel, and Lucifer was another one that was actually better, but then did some things they got in trouble for. So there are teachings that actually out there that actually do show you that they're two different people. The Marduk, Satane, Draman family lines are affiliated with something. They used to be affiliated with the crocodile cults in Egypt, where they were worshiping the crocodiles and all that kind of stuff. They were very popular in Sumeria. Native Americans were infiltrated by these groups, the Akkadians and the Russians. That's their primarily affiliation with the Russian family lines. They associate it with something called Draman the Dragon Queen. And this stuff has been surfacing on the internet recently because these guys are making contact with people, and most of it, unfortunately, is coming through the Native Americans, where they don't realize anymore, they don't have the history anymore either, who they're looking forward to, because there's a bunch of them sitting there waiting for the Dragon Queen to come back, for Draman the Dragon Queen to come back. Well, this is the head honchos of this group. These are not nice people. These are the ones that they created the Set school in Egypt, where there's this different group of mystical teachings in Egypt, the Set school. They did that in competition with the other Anunnaki groups, the Osiris and all those guys. Then they also did something called the necromancy. This is a book that's referred to as the Satanic Bible. It gives all sorts of interesting incantations and things that you can do to evoke things that you really don't want to evoke, and really get yourself tied into full possession if you really work with the necromancy. It's the Book of the Dead, or the Book of the Living Dead. It can teach you how to rise things from the dead when you're not supposed to, all sorts of things. And the other guys that work with necromancy are the Necromaton. That's where the name actually comes from. It was like a set of teachings that the Necromaton Andrami and the ones that like the Dracs made with the Marduk, Satane, Draman, Anunnaki lines, who are Drac agenda. Real good. Well, I'm almost done. There's 2 more on here. Then I'll let you escape for dinner. Yeah, and then we'll hit the fun stuff, because we're gonna have fun when we start to. I'm looking forward to the connections being made when you're, oh my God, that's how we got here. It makes perfect sense when you start to see the events and how they unfolded. So we'll do that after dinner. But before we go, there's 2 more we can get to know. All right, one is the Marduk Luciferian Anunnaki. Now again, that's out of that Marduk, particularly Marduk family line of the Nibiruan Anunnaki originally. They're the aquatic apes. Now, they're crossed with the Toth Enki Lilitan family line. Okay, so remember the Toth Enki groups were the ones that had Zeta gene codes in with them. So they had a reptilian line in with them. So these guys are crossed with only one specific version of the Toth Enki group. It was called the Lilitan family line. That name Lilitan is where we get the Lucifer associations. Okay, the Luciferians were anything that came out, that was combined with or came out of the Lilitan family line of the Toth Enki collective. We also have another group over in the Pleiades called the Samjaze groups. The Pleiadian, Samjaze, Luciferian Anunnaki, they are Luciferian because originally they came out of combining with the Lilitan family line of the Toth Enki group. So these are just really like family genealogies when you start seeing the relationships. But it helps to realize that these names, we got Satan, we have Lucifer, who are these people? They're family line references. They have to do with gene codes and race groups. They have to do with Nibiru. Now, the Marduk Luciferians, they have primary focus at this point. They started with Nibiru, but now they're in like Alpha and Omega Centauri, mainly Alpha Centauri. They're affiliated with Tiamat and a bit with Nibiru, but not as much. These guys assisted in putting the Nibiru and Dadic crystal grid in the net, 25,500 BC. So all of these Anunnaki groups are affiliated with Nibiru and with Tiamat and with Alpha and Omega Centauri. These are the ones that were responsible for raiding the place 25,500 BC, where they put in the Nibiru and Dadic crystal grid. Then they have been progressively raided by other things that came in after, when the wormholes were made in 10,500 BC. The last group, this is the Palladians. Do you ever look at the New Age section in a bookstore? There are Palladians everywhere. There are Palladian channels popping up everywhere, and they have been for at least 10, 15 years, some longer. The Palladians are not just that. I mean, you could call us Earthians, and it's not going to tell you a lot about us, right? We're Earthlings. What does that mean? Well, we probably come from Earth, okay? There's a lot of different groups here. It doesn't tell you anything. The word Palladian is most often used just so we don't worry about who they might be. They're an Anunnaki strain. They're called the Palladian Samjaze Luciferian Anunnaki because Samjaze is a personification. It's actually part of their family name that they take on, and there's this female that presents herself as Samjaze. And I met her once, and I said, don't even talk to me. I remember you from about 25,000 years ago, and I don't like you now either. But she looks like a Barbie doll, okay? I mean, the long blonde hair and the overdeveloped upper half, and the little shiny spacesuits, and you know, this type of thing, because she's presenting herself in the image she thinks we'll respond to. Yeah. I feel bad for the man called Billy Meyer, because he was having things with this person. And what they do is, these guys, these are the tricksters. The Palladians are the tricksters. And in some of their channeling stuff, they'll even tell you that. You know, but you think it's, oh, well, you seem nice and you're talking to us about all sorts of really neat stuff. Now you're telling us you're tricksters, but, well, that must be okay then, right? No. You know, they're really tricking you, because what they're doing is they're trying to take over like everybody else is. The Pleiadian, Samjasi, Luciferian groups are affiliated with Alcyone, what we identify as the star Alcyone in Pleiades here. I might as well drop this one here. When we get to density 2, when we get to density 2, I talk about that place called Tara, that's Earth's counterpart planet. What we see as Alcyone from density 1 is Tara in density 2. In density 3, we have a counterpart planet called Gaia. And that's etheric matter density. Density 2 is semi-etheric matter. Gaia, when we look up in our skies, is the star we identify as Polaris. All right. So these places are a lot closer than we thought. Yeah, at least we could see them. So anyway, the Pleiadian, Samjasi, Luciferians are at this point from Alcyone, a.k.a. Tara, because they took over half of the place. They took over part of Tara. That was part of the reason why the whole Earth missions had to be done, because 550 million years ago, they decimated Tara and almost blew it up, and half of it ended up down here where it had to re-evolve. That's how we got back down here. These guys work with something called, they work with the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid and the net, but they have something called the Phoenix APIN system. Now this is attached later when they put the wormhole in. The Phoenix APIN system is attached to the Phoenix wormhole. And these guys tend to work a lot with, they'll work with the White Eagle guys. Okay, remember the White Eagle APIN system is the one hijacked by the Necromaton Andromi. It used to be ours. It was a Gold Eagle then. And they hijacked it. Necromaton Andromis have that. These guys usually work with them. So you have the White Eagle and the Phoenix tend to work together unless they're having disputes. What we have interesting, there's a song that, I forget who wrote that song, who sang that. There's a road, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. There's a line in there, and the eagle flies with the dove. This was a coded song, and the guy who wrote it didn't know that. Yeah, okay, Steve Stills, yeah. What this meant was the fact that the eagle, all right, usually the eagle and the Phoenix were hooking up together. This is when there were deals being made by the Jehovian Anunnaki dolphin people, right, with the Necromaton Andromis. The Necromaton Andromis had the eagle, the eagle grid, and the dove grid belonged to the other one. So this stuff comes out in people. It comes out in our societies, and we don't realize the coding. But when we go into the history from 1916 up, and it's not going to be a long, laborious thing, it's just some major key points that get the message across, we're going to see how all these creatures were siding with each other and who was siding on which side. It helps if we can begin to remember each one of these collectives. I mean, the names are long. Pleiadian, Nibiruan, I don't know. Who was that again? The easiest way to remember them is by the APIN system that they use. We have doves, we have falcons, we have eagles, we actually have lions in there. That one's ours. Okay, we have the great lion that the Sphinx was actually modeled after its original. So when we get into the APIN systems, tomorrow I'm going to have the maps ready for those. That's going to be a long night. But I will have those ready. This is where it starts to be easier to remember who's who. If you can remember some of the basics, there'll be a chart that I'll have ready by tomorrow to show you, okay, now you know who the groups are, and we'll show you just what the system is and name the name. So it'll be easy, quick reference. You have a visual reference to it. So what we're doing is we're having like a zoological fight at the moment. You're having all sorts of animals going after each other. And our guys are waking up too. We have the Great White Lion grid, which was the Elohai Elohim grid that's connected to Lyra Aramatena, D12. That one's been down for over 200,000 years. That was one of the very ancient ones, put in about 3 million years ago or more. Actually, probably about 5 million years ago. Our grids were put in to hold the planet together during stellar activation cycles after the electric wars 5.5 million years ago. Our grids weren't put in to manipulate them. They were put in to hold the planetary grid stable when they went through stellar activations. So we have these grids. We have that, the 4 faces of man that I talked about yesterday. These are systems. The 4 faces of man is called an LPIN system. It's not Atlantean, it's Lumerian. And the A in the APIN stands for Atlantean. Okay, they were Atlantean Pylon Implant Networks. Okay, so what it's going to come down to is understanding where these animals live and understanding who belongs to which ones. And when it comes down to how we're going to fix the mess that we're moving into, that we're going to find out at the end of tonight when we come back from dinner, we're going to find out by the end of this history line, and it's not too long of a history line, we're going to find out what it is that has to be done to stop what by what, because we're going to get into when there's going to be earth changes if we don't get this work done before the beginning of next year, really. So we're going to just find out how to do it by activating our grids. All right. Now I'm going to let you go for dinner. Yeah. And what time? Can we go? Can we survive? It's like 7:15 now. Oh my God.
It's 10 after 7 now.
10 after 7. Okay, that's good. We're just 7, 8. Okay. Well, how about, because we usually do an hour and a half for dinner. Yeah, we do 8:30 back for dinner. Is that all right? Is that enough time? Yeah. So.
I understand. So it's a matter of what you're going to do with that money. Yeah.
Hello. Everything's all right.
Okay, guys.
Everybody back? Okay. All right. Wait. What? Matt. Oh, you, okay. It's you. Okay. I hope you all had a good dinner. I hope you could find some place to eat. Did you guys run into like the lines going out the doors, an hour waiting time? So did we. We ended up in this horrid little diner that I had to send back. I ordered a Reuben sandwich, and it was like rubber. So I had to send it back. So I was glad we didn't see anybody else from the group there, because you're better off not even eating in that place. But was it? Yeah, I don't even remember the name of the diner. All I know is the menu looked good, but the stuff was like rubberized or something.
Boston Market was good. Oh, yeah,
Was it?
That for lunch. Yeah, that for lunch. It was good.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
in a minute, we're going to get into the events timeline from 1916 forward. But right now, since we've been talking all of this talk about Atlantis, a lot of you guys that have the Templar manual, what?
Can you hold off, please?
Oh, okay.
But I think you have to run the sound through the recorder.
Oh, there's a whole. I thought it looked kind of barren in here. There's a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
You were saying the Buddhist symbol is going to become dangerous, or?
To counteract the fourth Jehovah's Seal release and to counteract the pulses they're going to send through to make the two wormholes open up into one. If we're successful, it should be all right. We may get some hurricane activity, but it shouldn't be a problem. If not, it's going to be a big problem. And they just, this is literally, they told me this yesterday. They gave this level of it yesterday. So I'll talk about that when we get through the timeline to bring us up to the present and what we're going to be doing.
So Peru is very important.
Yeah. Peru is very important. Yeah. Yeah, they're all important, but this one is like,
It was like
which way? This is like the turnstile one. However this goes.
2001, the night of 2000, the night of 1999 to 2000.
Yeah, what, January 1st?
Yeah, January 1st.
Yeah.
That was.
Oh, that was a riot, and we didn't know how important it was either. You know, we probably would have been terrified that we'd do it wrong or
I
something.
would never have missed that one.
Right, right.
And Peru looks like that too. So we got to go to Peru.
Whoever can get there, we're going. Okay. Can I go yet? Okay. Yeah, I'm ready when you are. Yeah.
But the whole
Okay.
thing that you are talking about this weekend
Yes.
leads to that, no?
Yeah, and then once that's done, we still have those 24 temples that we're recoding that we talked about in Kauai. Okay, but this is a big one. Like, we don't have any more to worry about if this doesn't go well. Okay, anyway. All right, now that we're back, and I'm going to try not to keep us here till like midnight, we're all snoring in our seats, especially me, because when I go home, I have to get the other diagrams and things ready for tomorrow, And because tomorrow we can't run real late, we could, but a lot of people have to get back on buses and things. So I'm going to try to wrap it up tomorrow for around 6 or 6:30, whatever the time is. Yeah, I think Marianne said it was about 6:30. People had to catch buses. So I'm going to have to start at, between 10:30 and 11 tomorrow, and maybe just have a short lunch break and not, we could do a picnic.
That would be good.
Can we possibly do that? It will save time running around for restaurants and everything tomorrow. So we can take a lunch break, in here if we have to. But if it's nice weather, just if we could bring a sandwich or something from, one of the local convenience stores or something, it'll save time. Because I'm going to be out, I'm ready to fall asleep on my feet now. I won't be in about 5 minutes when I get going. But by the time I go home, I'm going to have to sleep a little bit, which is going to leave me probably maybe 7 hours to get probably about 15 hours worth of work done. To have this in here so you have something to take home with you. I'd like to have the diagrams done of the animals so you can see where these grids are, and a couple other charts that will be very useful to go with the handouts that you have. Now, I still encourage anybody that doesn't have the Templar manual. That is a compilation of about 3 or 4 different workshops. Like each level of data, it is worth getting if you don't have it, if you're interested in really doing this work. But even if you don't have it, the stuff that you're getting, these little pieces of handouts that you're getting, that will give you the main focus of what you learned here in a condensed form, so at least you have it. So tomorrow, if we can try to, we're going to probably try to keep the breaks short and just keep maybe an hour for lunch, but really an hour, not an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes like they tend to go when everybody's running all over. And I will do my best to be here between 10:30 and 11. I will say that. If I'm not here at 10:30, somebody else will be to start, the work like they were today. Okay, yes?
Because of the terrorist attacks, we have to probably leave at 5.
You have to leave at 5.
Go 2 hours to sit in the airport.
Oh, right.
You might want us, will we miss a lot the last 2 hours? Are we doing
Well, I will try to keep that in mind and try to make it so you don't miss a lot in the last 2 hours. Okay. Is there anybody that has to leave before 5? Oh, good. I will do my best to get, the most important stuff done before 5.
Get there an hour before, that's not a big deal.
I still
Yeah.
call tonight to find out.
Yeah. Okay.
An hour is fine.
Okay. Now, anyway, for tonight, since we probably, what's about 9:15 now?
It's 10 after 9.
10 after 9?
Yes.
Me and time and myself have an interesting relationship. Okay, it's 10 after 9. All right, I'm going to try to be done here by 10:30, 11:45-ish. So you guys get a chance to go to sleep, and so I get a chance to go to sleep before I have to wake up at about midnight to get back to working on this. So I want to cover a lot of ground quickly to get us to the end of what I wanted to cover today. All right, we were talking about the races, and I talked a lot about the races that are involved with the Illuminati, with the fallen angelics. And we've talked about Atlantis, and everything seems to be coming out of Atlantis, and these problems we have with these wormholes are coming from Atlantis. And for the people who haven't had any of the other courses before, I just wanted to show you this map. It is one of the ones out of that book. This is the map of what the continents looked like before the cataclysm of 28,000 BC, when the Atlantean continent got broken down into 3 island groups. All right, in through here, up here, this little thing, it actually looks like kind of like the profile of a sea turtle. And this would be the flipper coming down, this would be the shell, that would be its tail, and this would be its head. And it actually used to be called Turtle Island. They referred to it as the turtle. This is why there's a lot of Native American legends that talk about life started on the back of a turtle, right, and this kind of thing. That there is a lot of the turtle affiliation with that. Over here, there was the other continent that was, they call it Lemuria, but it was actually Maharavi. It was what it was called. And that got shortened to Mu, but it was Maharavi. And these 2 continents existed until this one went down in 50,000 BC. And it was because this one has something on it called Q Site 12, which is the activation site for Stargate 12. Stargate 12 is in France, at Montségur. And in 50,000 BC, one of the Jehovian races tried to invade, and they literally did certain things to blow up this landmass. So they would shred the gate connections, so you couldn't activate Gate 12, and they were successful at the time. Gate 12 has been repaired since then, but it's not been activated because the grids couldn't run D12 frequency. So over here, what we have left of what was Lemuria is we end up with the the islands, the Hawaiian Islands, and then some of the more in the South Pacific islands. Right here is, this one is, I think I have to say, I can't read these too good because they're fuzzy. This down here was Easter Island. That is another important Q site. I believe it's Q site 2 that goes with Stargate 2. Stargate 2 is off the coast of Siesta Key, Florida. Now when we come over here where this landmass used to be, and this was here until 28,000 BC, when another attempted attack ended up in creating, they're really photosonic pulses that they were using at that time. It's a combination of sound and light frequencies that were, it was a crystal-based technology. And there were certain attempts to take over gates that were made by running ley lines from here over into what's now Giza, Egypt area, because Giza, Egypt holds Stargate 4, and that's always been a prime area, because that's the, Stargate 4 connects to the solar gate, okay, in the sun, which is the one that goes from D3 into dimension 4. It's the crossover point from this harmonic universe into the next density level, so it's always been a prime target. Because they were playing with frequency the wrong way through the horizontal ley lines here, they ended up creating a disaster. They created it on purpose, where there are ley lines, axiotonal lines that run vertically through here. There's one somewhere right about here, axiotonal 1. Then axiotonal 7 comes down here. That's the one at 70 degrees west longitude. They ended up literally sinking parts of the continent, and it didn't just sink below the ocean. It sunk into the phantom Earth matrix that was already there from 5.5 million years ago. This is why there's hardly anything left under the ocean of what Atlantis is. It didn't only go underwater, it went down into the phantom matrix. It was literally sucked, the landmass was sucked into a black hole, which means it went up in a ball of fire, the waters came in over it, and then literally it's the parts of the matter base here that couldn't transmute turned into ash, and the rest of it went down and reassembled into the grids of Phantom Earth. So right now, where is Atlantis? Atlantis is alive and well in Phantom Earth, and that's in the Phantom Matrix. This is where these guys are coming from, a lot of them. They're trying to come back up. Atlantis rising, you know how that's kind of like a catchphrase in the New Age movement. That's what it's about. It's about them, the Atlanteans, and the whole thing coming back up. We're going to start seeing Atlantis again. Why? Because they're planning to pull the rest of us down in there with it, where it'll be visible again. You know, so it's more like Earth sinking rather than Atlantis rising. All right. What was left after the set of explosions that took place in 28,000 BC were these areas up here. They're called Lohas Atlantis. Down in here, which is now the Bermuda areas, they were called Nohasa Atlantis. And down in here was called Brua Atlantis. And there was literally like a land bridge that connected here and connected down and through here. That was lost later. Even after these were island nations, the Bermuda Islands were a lot bigger than they are now too. Because in 9558 BC, when they purposely orchestrated, again, another cataclysm in order to bring more of it down into the Phantom Matrix, these areas got much smaller than they had been after the 28,000 BC thing. So this at least shows you that once upon a time, our maps looked like this. In these times, this wasn't very far away. This is where North America is now. Columbus didn't discover America. They knew it was there all along. And a lot of the races, the Illuminati races, the Illuminati were always structured in a way where one or two of them would have, like people out of each group would have contact with they'd either have channeling contact or they'd have direct physical contact with one of the fallen angelic groups. They'd be given information and told how much of it they were allowed to give to the next circle out. And then they would be told they could only give this much to the next circle out, to the point where you got like out here in the circles where these guys had no idea, and they were just being directed by creeds they didn't even know what was at the center of. So the Illuminati races, they have come up out of here. They knew about, the ones at the top echelon knew that Atlantis existed. They in fact, once in a while they'd even get a chance to see one of the real maps that showed where it was and this kind of things. But for the rest of people, it became legend, it became mythology. These were real places. At the same time, it wasn't just Atlantis that was inhabited. This place has been inhabited literally for millions of years, and there's been a number of cataclysms, several house cleanings. There's a period of time, I believe it went from like 70,000 BC, 75,000 BC, up to was it? It's in the timelines. I don't have these charts out. I won't even go back into that history now because I want to do current. But there was a long period of time, many thousands of years, where the angelic human 12 tribes were actually in exile, hiding, because the Anunnaki races from Nibiru had come in and taken over the planet. They hadn't got full control of the grids, and they hadn't got rid of humans, but they had come in and dominated the surface Earth, where humans literally had gone into underground civilizations, not in inner Earth, but literally beneath in caverns beneath the surface Earth. And there were long periods of time where, just to keep our races alive on the planet, that we lived in those type of conditions while they were running around on surface taking over everything. Over in this area was what we would call the U Empire. That was one of there were 5 primary races that were called Palladia Earth-type Cloister races that started seeding 3 of the angelic human lineage. And the first, they had these groups, the names here go with them. This one was the U Empire, and they were over in this area that's now like China and everything. Down here it was called the Rama Empire. That's down in through India and spreading into some of the Middle East. Over here we had 2 of the races. They were called the and the Brenoa races. And down in through here, up in through here, and over in the Lemurian area, you had the Iani and the Mua, which were the Moravi. They were the primary 5 races. The Iani were the High Council. They were the ones that came from inner Earth, the Indigo High Council, that came in and helped to set everything up here. They helped to reseed for seeding 3. So this was really what the world looked like in those days. So the information that we're giving you now, as far as wormholes, in Atlantis and everything, these were real places that we're talking about. There were real maps that showed what we have now, where it goes with that. So now that I showed you this, a lot of you have already seen it from Kauai and things, but for the people who hadn't seen it yet, these are the beginnings of the Atlantean maps, so at least show relationships of where were these continents. We know what happened to them now. Part of them got literally sucked down into the black hole matrix. The other parts, they're still going to find some things. There are going to be some things surfacing because of shifting that's going to be going down frequency-wise as more of the planetary grids activate if things go well here. There will be things found beneath the oceans that right now literally aren't there to find yet. As we move into higher frequency, there's literally going to be more manifestation taking place. So there's a lot of discoveries that are going to be found if things progress well and it doesn't go in a cataclysm. It's going to be a very interesting period of 20 years past this point, because it will take us it will literally change all of the things we were taught about how reality is, because there will be things that are becoming apparent that show where what we were taught about reality was erroneous. It wasn't true. So we have things to look forward to, is finding parts of the evidence of these civilizations. Part of that's already happening. I've talked about, in Kauai, we talked a lot about the Nibiruan crystal temple networks. These are those things with the huge, massive selenite rods in them. And Leela actually got this lady here. It was so funny the way it was arranged. She came to one of our workshops, and right after that she got invited to this expedition in Mexico. And they had just discovered this huge cavern with these awesome, massive, like skyscraper height almost, selenite crystal rods. And she brought pictures back, real pictures that she was there. She's standing underneath them, you know what I mean? And she brought them to the Kauai workshop. And it was interesting because she didn't know that I was going to teach about the crystal caverns. All right? The crystal networks that are the Nibiruan crystal temple networks connect to an organic feature of Earth's body, which are called the crystal caverns. These are actually deep within the ground, particularly beneath a lot of the oceans and deep within the continents. There are crystalline tunnels and caverns that at certain parts of them, they have frequency modulation zones, which are portal passageways. If you have the right frequency in your DNA, you will be able to see where they are and be able to pass through them if you have the pass keys in your DNA. The crystal caverns, we had been given the information on them. We're doing a workshop on it. Wasn't even known that was going to be part of it. She shows up at the workshop to attend the workshop with this whole book full of pictures of the crystals. It was like perfect synchronization. So the things are starting to be found. They said there's going to be 2 more. I think they said it was by 2002 or 3, there was going to be 2 more large networks like the ones that were just found in Chihuahua, Mexico. In other regions, they didn't say where they were going to be found, but they said there will be 2 more, and there's one of them that's amethyst. that actually, they're not all selenite rods. So there's going to be some interesting discoveries as we move along, as long as things stay stable enough where we have a chance to enjoy the discoveries. Okay? So this is Atlantis, or this was Atlantis. That was Lemuria. That was us, South America, Asia. And at least we still have, and it's kind of funny because in the Atlantean period, in my lifetimes there, in our simultaneous time, I have spent a lot of time in Lojas. That was kind of where I spent a lot of time as far as many of my simultaneous incarnations were in that area. And also over here in what had been Lemuria before it became islands. At least we have England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales left, because they are a part of Atlantis. They are the part that remained visible. And there has been a whole big important thing of hiding things on maps. That as soon as they did the 9558 BC house cleaning here, literally things like maps that showed where parts of things were confiscated, and then false maps were evolved, and we were gently guided into creating this illusion of what we think was our history. We were helped all along to create the false history by having people having contact. Most of our history and our religious books were channeled. All right, that's the easiest way for them to communicate with people here from the Phantom Matrix. If they can get into your field, they can move part of their energy field, like pretend you have your astral body, it's like your ghost body, and you can move it over to the side. Well, you could put it in somebody else's body if you wanted to. This is how the distortions came most of the time in our history records, in our in the religious records, how they twisted books. The whole thing, there was at one point we released some of the story, and it's going to be released in not this book that's coming out, but the next one. The story of Moses in all of that. This was a riot. Galactic Federation was at the center of that one. I mean, part in the Red Sea and all this. Well, you could say God did it, if you want to call God Galactic Federation. All right? The things that have been attributed to God in our Bibles and in our holy books were not acts of God. That was, except, well, I guess they were. There was a truth to that. The Anunnaki groups are calling themselves our gods. And in that sense, yes, they were acts of those gods, but they're not our gods. When the walls of Jericho came tumbling down and Babylon was flattened and all those things, these were photosonic technologies that were used. These were things that actually had almost like ray guns, okay? They were physical technologies. They weren't some god saying, you were bad, so we're going to get rid of you. This was part of the war games. So at this point, we're faced with this huge revelation of history that kind of, when it started to come through and they were giving me layer after layer of this, I was just numbed, like watching the trade tower things. Just numb. Yeah, and I had enough incarnational memory open to know they were right. Because I remembered being in those times, and I could never figure out how come I had these memories. How did they fit with this history that we're telling us? Because it didn't seem to fit. It made sense with what I knew inside. All of us have these memory banks. They're not active yet, but the more we work with DNA activation, the more we will get our memory of these times back. There's a part of each of us now in the Atlantean period, in the Lemurian period. If we're here, it implies that we're also there, because it's simultaneous. When we incarnate, we come in simultaneously into 1,728 different time vectors. So we have 1,728 different selves, and that's if you're just human. That's if you have 12-strand pattern. If you're an indigo, you have lots more than that. Indigos you can look at, some have a 12-strand and another 12-strand. Some have 12, 12, and 12, and some have 12, 12, 12, and 12, with 1,728 that go with each one. Right? So those other selves of you exist right now with you. They're alive in their time frames, like you are, and they're a part of your avatar consciousness. When you get to be fully an embodied avatar, you will know yourselves as all of those selves. Your concept of self expands. You'll realize that, yeah, I had that body form there, I'm manifesting in that body form there, and I have these purposes in this part of my life. You all of a sudden you realize yourself is beyond body form, that has the ability to put yourself into multiple body forms at the same time. So it's a whole new level of revelation of self when you start to get into this space. What's good about this, the fact that we're connected to our other time selves, is we can help each other in times like this. They know, some of them are in more advanced cycles where they're not as repressed as they are here. In the inner earth, we have incarnations in those time cycles. It's a different time matrix, literally, that interfaces with our own, that creates the inner earth time cycles. There are selves of us there. They're the ones that are sending the information to us here to help us to get out of this predicament, because if we get stuck, they get stuck. So there's this huge support system. We can get scared sometimes if we look around and think, God, we're all alone with this, and we're just learning this knowledge, and it's a tiny little group, and there's a whole bunch of groups that are not going to want to deal with this stuff, particularly if they're dealing with anybody on that list that I had up first. If you start to realize that you're not alone here and you never were, it's really helpful because you have a support team with you. They're in other time frames, but times aren't far away. They're actually taking place in the same space. The only thing making you separate from your other time selves is the axis on which your particles are rotating. That is it. All right, angular rotation of particle spin allows multiple different reality fields and matter fields to take place in exactly the same space, but be imperceivable and invisible to each other, where they literally pass through each other. So yourselves are very close, and it can help to know that. It can help to draw on that. Or if you realize that you're here as part of a team, what would look like a team? If you got all of yourselves into this time continuum, you'd have quite the party. You'd have at least 1,728, and possibly 4 times that, and that would just be you. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I remember, but my first thought was, oh God, I wouldn't want to have to figure out what to wear in the morning. It's hard enough with one body. Yeah. All right. So now, okay, I'm going to go into, this is the stuff that, this is the stuff, when I saw how this unfolded, I just kind of shook my head and said, oh Lordy.
I'm going to try that way, shall we?
Yeah, we can give that a shot. Yeah. Okay. The recent timeline of events from 1916 to 2001. I'm going to go through some of it fast because if I go through this as slowly as I did the first part, we'll be here until probably next Friday. All right. 1916, the Zetas. That's the Zeta Regalian races. They are the ones that have the Zeta Draconian agenda. All right. The Zeta races of Phantom Earth opened the Atlantean Falcon wormhole. All right, we had the Falcon wormhole and the Phoenix wormhole. All right, they opened the Falcon wormhole off the eastern coast of South Carolina, and it's right down there, like close to the border of Florida. And then the Phoenix is right below that, like across from out on the coast of like St. Augustine, Jacksonville, that area of Florida. Okay, so they opened the wormhole. That was both of these wormholes were located in Lower Nohasa, Atlantis. Sonics from their side. Okay. And they've been trying to do it for a long time. It took them a long time to get through the cap, the frequency cap that the Guardians had put on it. Excuse me a minute, it's getting hot. Here we go again. You can feel the energy coming in. This is where I was drooping before and I was tired while we were having dinner. Now I'm getting the energy coming back in. I can feel it. I'll probably start talking fast. If I don't, we're not going to get out of here in time. Okay. All right. They came in and they began speculating for invasion. Now this is a situation where they came in to our time frame. The Anunnaki had been dominating everything here since Atlantis. The Anunnaki are the ones who orchestrated the fall of Atlantis. They're the ones, they had the Nibiru Dyadic crystal grid already operational here. They had the net operational here. They had control over most of the Illuminati hybrid races here. So it was Anunnaki dominated predominantly for most of the time from Atlantis all the way through. There were always these competing groups of fallen angelic races that were trying to get in to work with their Illuminati, where you had the Draconian races coming up and competing with them, and some of the Centaur races coming up, through their Illuminati races here competing. That's why we had a huge history of fighting since the Atlantean period, because you had these various different Illuminati groups that were taking over human tribes, and then they were fighting with each other because they represented different fallen angelics. But when we entered this century, the Anunnaki races figured they had it aced. All right, they 100 years before the year 2000, they had it aced. They were in control of most of the Illuminati races. They had the territories mostly under their control, as far as gate territories and all that kind of stuff. So they figured they were just going to run their little agenda and come in here as our space brothers and get it all done nice and neat, and just get rid of the other, the competitors. Well, they had quite a surprise. In 1916, the Zetas from Phantom Earth managed to break through the wall in time and started to invade here. And what they did was they made treaties with certain members of the Illuminati races. Now, remember, the Illuminati were pretty much controlled already through mystical schools that had come up literally from Atlantis. They were controlled by Anunnaki. All of a sudden, you have these little gray guys coming in and saying, hey, you're being positioned for an invasion. these Anunnaki races are trying to come in here and invade you. Talk about pot calling the kettle black. I mean, yeah. So the Illuminati are like, oh, they're trying to invade, aren't they? The Zetas convinced the Illuminati that the Anunnaki were trying to invade, which was true. They forgot to tell them that they were too. So the Zeta treaties came down in the early 1930s. Actually, they started in the 1920s. And 1930s is when they began to make official treaties, where a group called MJ-12, or Majestic 12, was formed that had to do with certain members of the Illuminati in America and in several other countries. It became the foundation of what later became the CIA in America, but it's connected with a bunch of other groups. Now, most of the people in the CIA don't know anything about MJ-12. Even in the highest ranks of most of our government and our services on the outside, they really don't know, and they honestly think most of this is just made up stuff. They don't even realize there's ETs. Some of them do, but most of them don't. The ones who know that ETs have been here are literally on death oaths, where literally they have signed contracts before they get to see or know anything, that if they reveal this information, they will be killed, but not only them, their families will be hunted. And that's what keeps them quiet. They're quiet because they're afraid. And most of them didn't get in on it because they wanted to see ETs. They were usually in a level of service that had top security clearance to begin with. And certain things were going down, and one of their Illuminati bosses, because see, the Illuminati guys are positioned in very, very specific little places. You don't have Illuminati controlling any one government. They're just certain people put in the right places in power positions where they get to pull strings on the lower ranks below them. So the Illuminati people get kind of suckered into this stuff. They really do. People, when we look at our external governments, these guys have been messed with just like the rest of the humans here. Except the only difference was they had some knowledge something was going on, and they trusted the wrong groups. They got played because of their own greed. Because there was a greed factor that played right into the Zetas plan, where the Illuminati guys wanted power. They wanted dominion over territories here. They didn't know about Stargates. That was a new surprise, because they didn't remember from Atlantis either. But the Zetas come in and say, okay, this invasion is coming. We can stop this invasion. And then we can get you in any position of power you want. We'll give you this technology. We'll give you weapons technology. And they did. They gave them certain types of weapons technology. So in the 1930s, you had the Zeta Regalian treaties, a Majestic 12, and what happened from that point on was a very rapid organization of something called the World Management Team. It was already a not quite as formalized organization of Illuminati covert governing, but it was more like tribes that were governing things from behind the scenes that were being motivated by the Anunnaki races. When the Dracs came in, the Zeta Regalians on behalf of the Dracs, they homogenized everything into, it was like the beginning of our corporate structure. They pulled it all together and did like time efficiency, got everybody really organized so they'd function well. They created the World Management Team, which later moved into like the, what they call it, the like World Banking Commission stuff and the multinational corporations. All of this stuff came out of the activities of the World Management Team, Bilderberg Commission, all of this stuff. This started, and we actually have the Zetas and the Dracs to thank for that. The Anunnaki hadn't quite got that far. They were still playing with religions and had their like nice Templar groups and various mystical societies, but they hadn't quite pulled the political organizations together. The Dracs did that through the Zetas when they came in. Now, also in the 1930s, once the Zetas got in here, they began to activate the old Falcon APIN system. That was the one that was connected to the Falcon matrix. And the Falcon literally spread its wings across the planet. So these were these little microchip-like implant grids that ran through the planet. What these grids do is they allow for communication, they allow for frequency transmission and broadcasting, but they also they can fire, which means they'll pop and create little black holes along the whole grid that would connect. See, these were put in with the purpose of, when the stellar activation cycle came, to activate and fire them all, which would create a whole series of little black holes, kind of like, how when a needle runs across a piece of fabric from like a sewing machine needle, it leaves all those little holes. Well, if you do enough of those holes, that whole piece will fall right into the Phantom Matrix. That's what they were created for. The ones that the Guardian races created were meant to work differently. They were meant to create pillars of sound that would anchor our grids into the grids of inner Earth, parallel Earth, and another time matrix called the Miage zone system, which is another one that interfaces here only sometimes, to give us pillars of energy that would allow us to not get pulled down into phantom. So they begin to activate. The Zetas begin to activate in the 1930s their Falcon APIN system. Also in the 30s, they begin to assist to more fully organize Hitler's Nazi movement. They had a vested interest. They could do some interesting things with the Hitler guys. Well, one of the first things they wanted to do was to get rid of certain races that were competing. I'm getting tired. The races they were most interested in getting rid of were a certain group that had been very loyal to the Anunnaki Illuminati, and that they wouldn't go into the Zeta contracts. And these guys were Hebrew. They were passed off as Hebrew, but they weren't Hebrew people. They were Hybiru. They were the Hybiru race lines. Now, hiding under the guise of Hebrew, you have real Hebrew people, which were angelic humans. You have Hyksos, false Hebrew people, which were one of the hybrid lines from the Anunnaki side. And you have Hybiru that has both Anunnaki and Drak family lines in it. What the Zetas wanted done was to get rid of a whole bunch of the Hybiru and the Hyksos lines of what appeared to be the Jewish population, but to leave the ones that were the draconian lines. And for a while, that was going on. As we moved through this period, we're going into World War and everything. I'll go down to here, because we have stuff to do in here that just blew my mind when I found out about what the whole Japanese thing was really about. Down here, but first we had in the 30s, the Zetas and the Drak agendas were assisting Hitler. Down here, by the time we kind of moved into the 40s, Hitler started to make double deals because the Necromaton and Dramies approached him. And they started to promise him that they would lead him to ancient relics, the Templar prizes. And they did. They showed him some stuff. They gave him some stuff, and that's still buried out there someplace. The Nazis actually had some of the ancient relics from Atlantis because they used the Necromaton and Dramies used them for barter to convince Hitler and his group to do some double dealing for them. And what the Andramis wanted was, since you're getting rid of all these people, why don't you get rid of those Drak families too, the ones that the Zetas wanted protected? So Hitler started to do that on behalf of the Andramis, because the Andromedes were paying him with some knowledge, mystical knowledge, and some of the relics from Atlantis. So this didn't settle really well with the Zetas. They got very upset, in fact. So they worked with the Allies to make sure Hitler was taken down. What was interesting before that, when the Draks were assisting Hitler, one of the ways they were assisting him was having the Illuminati in the Allied countries finance the Hitler movement. Literally, the United States Illuminati, the European Illuminati. While we're fighting these guys, the Illuminati guys are taking money from us and giving them to them to keep their movement going. So this is some of the sleight of hand that's been going on, with our politics. What was really bizarre was what happened with the whole, the Pearl Harbor leading to Hiroshima and all of that thing. What happened with this was at the points where in the 1930s the Zetas were expanding and activating their Falcon APIN system. Now this APIN system had some major sites that were more important than others, that had primary links that were stronger and larger than some of the smaller ones. One of the biggest ones, and most important ones, if they were going to completely spread their, activate their matrix around the globe, was located in Nagasaki, Japan. Interestingly, not Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And because the Necromaton and Dramies were getting a little nervous at this point, because the Draks had come in, the Zetas on behalf of the Draks had come in, they'd literally gotten control of the Illuminati World Management Team, and they were starting to get control of the grids. And the Andramis didn't like that too much. It was becoming a nuisance and a problem. So the Necromaton were going to build bases. One of them was going to be beneath, like in the waters around and beneath Nagasaki, so they could set up their own sonic system and block the Zetas from further activating the full Falcon grid. That didn't settle very well with the Zetas. They were also, the Necromaton were also going to put a base over in Hawaii, in the Hawaiian waters, and they were going to control certain networks on the Falcon through the ley line grids by having these bases here. They were going to stop the Falcon from fully spreading its wings. Well, that was the agenda the Necromaton had at the moment anyway. So what was done was a little interesting little deal where the Zeta groups approached their Illuminati races, because they had collectives here, they had collectives in Japan, they have them all over the place. It's not one nationality, has Zeta races and another has an Anunnaki. There are dominant ones, but really they're scattered throughout. So the Zetas approached both the Japanese Illuminati and the United States Illuminati. They told them what was going to go down. They told Japan to invade, to give us an excuse to go into the war. We knew, certain levels of our Illuminati knew that was coming. In fact, there were even messages sent when those fleets were coming in. They were spotted, they were seen by U.S. troops, and the information was sent back. But it was received, but it was never acknowledged having been received. So we got a surprise attack.
That's in the case of New York City.
What do you mean?
There were 9 messages.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't even talk about that yet. So we have this situation, this drama created. The purpose of the drama was the Zetas, who were in power at the time for the Drac agenda, mobilized their Illuminati on both sides of the game to create a war game so they could, at one point, first of all, they stopped the Necromaton from building a base over in the Hawaiian area because there was so much scrutiny at that point and so much military presence in that point. They weren't going to be able to quietly build an underground base without getting spotted. So they weren't able to build the Necromaton weren't able to build their base off the coast of Hawaii. And that led to, after some other fancy dealings with other countries like Hitler and things like that, it led to, this was what they really wanted to do. The Necromaton had succeeded to some degree in sealing off the Nagasaki port interface that went with the Falcon Matrix. They didn't fully have a base there yet, but they'd started to build one, and they had what's like a frequency fence or cloaking shield. Now, if that cloaking shield was on there, the Zetas couldn't activate it. So they had to get something big enough and powerful enough, and they didn't have the grids fully activated yet to do the sonics the way they do now. If they were going to get that sonic power in the grids, they had to have all of these online. But if you drop a nuclear bomb on top of one of them, it tends to leave a weakness in those kind of fields that will allow mild sonics, which they did have access to shatter it. So they went after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hiroshima was very interesting. It had a whole little collective of Necromaton and Andrami Illuminati hybrid races, but the majority of the populations of Hiroshima were of the U-race descent. They were Magi Grail Line Indigos that were grid guardians, and they wanted to get rid of those and get rid of the competing Illuminati while they were at it. So they took out Hiroshima, but what they were really after was Nagasaki, because they needed to get that bomb dropped on those sites to weaken the force field that was over their port interface system, so they could then use the mild sonics they had available to completely flatten the force field so they could activate that site and get their supersonic waves available. What they've done by activating the full matrix of the Falcon, they were harnessing the power of being able to create targeted unnatural disasters, earthquakes. I mean, Alaska has been, since the 30s, and like moving especially up into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, this was like testing ground. They were using all sorts of sonics up there to see if they could target earthquakes, how far they could get. If you ever look at the information, like just, that's on record as far as the earthquakes up in the Alaska area, there was Alaska, they went for certain desert areas, then they started go for population areas when it became time to start reducing populations, because they knew that for the year 2000 to 2008, when their invasion was scheduled to go, if the stargates were going to open, which they didn't know until 1998, nobody was absolutely certain if the frequencies in the grids would be enough to actually trigger what's called grounding of the stellar bridge. That is when certain frequencies start to come down from the higher dimensional gates, and if there's a compatible frequency in Earth's core, they will latch together, and that's what starts the cycle, the stellar activation cycle. It wasn't until 1998 that anybody knew for sure if it was actually going to go into full stellar activation, but everybody had their troops in position by that time. So all through, literally, from the periods of time when World War II was orchestrated as a territorial conquest and competition between who was going to get what grids activated, it went into series of several types of testing. Now, still throughout this time, the Zetas, on behalf of the Draconian agenda, were doing population reduction experiments to see, okay, when it got closer to 2,000, what would they use to really, take them out. And the idea was to take them out without getting the surface people all stirred up, because the last thing any of them wanted was for us to realize there was an invasion taking place, because there was enough of us to do something about it. And you had the guardian groups trying like heck to try to get in here and communicate with any of us. If we started to realize from this level there was an invasion taking place, the guardians might just get an in and somebody might listen if they could get through to them telepathically or something. So it was always had to be kept hush-hush, make sure the general populations don't know. Most of the military and governments don't know. Only head echelons in the Illuminati have had the privilege of knowing that we've had ETs here for 70 years. Okay? So it progressed from World War II drama. Let's see. In 1943, this was after like the war stuff had, begun to cool down. 1943, there was something called the Philadelphia experiment was launched. All right, this was done on August 12th, 1943. And if you'll notice in a lot of things, August 12th comes up all the time. August 12th is an important time in relation to how frequency works in the planetary grids. It's called a magnetic peak point. What that means is the planetary magnetic Merkaba spins at its fastest during that time. I think it starts around the 8th of August. It hits its climax point at the 12th, and then is still at a peak until I think about the 15th. So there's usually activity. If they're going to do sonics or anything and they need to amplify them, these are the periods of time that they use. August 12th. Montauk was done August 12th. All right, there has been August 12th all along has been a point in time when if there were going to be sonics used in the grids that had to have an extra kick behind them, that's when we do them. That's why the dimensional blend experiment of 2003 was scheduled for August 12th, 2003. That was supposed to be the last phase. First you had Philadelphia experiment. That did one thing. What the Philadelphia experiment did was it took the Falcon wormhole, which already had some of its APIN systems activated, and it blew open smaller wormholes in the Philadelphia area. These were areas that were already spiked. They were parts of the Falcon grid that had been put in Atlantis, but they were larger holes. They were wormholes that you could actually use. You could literally go from that wormhole directly into Phantom instead of having to go from the port interface site down back to the main wormhole and in. So these were like direct smaller holes that would lead in. They did the Philadelphia experiment. And what they did in the Philadelphia experiment is they got literally the whole East Coast lineup in. They activated all of those grids, which ran from Portland, Maine, all the way down through Boston, down through New York City. All of our major cities have been built along these lines. It wasn't an accident. They were built along these lines because concentrations of populations were needed there, because that's the areas where you need to run the frequency through the DNA templates to have the most effect. So they would set up, literally, the places where major civilizations were going to take place to make sure concentrations of bodies were going to be on those grids. All right, so by the time we did the 1943 experiment, this really gave them an extra, the Zetas an extra, they were really in control of things at this point, because they had control of most of the grids. The other matrices, the Falcon matrix and the other competing APIN systems, weren't activated yet. And the Anunnaki still had part of their advantage. They had the Nibirian Dadic crystal grid, and they had the net, but they were progressively losing control of the sites that they used to have everything under control through the net. They couldn't use that anymore because progressively the Zetas the Falcon Matrix was getting control over the 24 crystal temple sites that I've talked about, the Nibirian crystal temple sites. They're getting control over the grids. So this was starting to create an issue. Now that the Dracs had come in on behalf, the Zeta Regalians on behalf of the Drac agenda, they had come in, and all of a sudden the Anunnaki realized they weren't getting as far as they wanted to as fast. They thought it would be an easy kill. They thought they'd come in here and just get rid of some, troublesome Illuminati groups that belonged to the Dracs and belonged to the Necromaton, and then they'd just, saunter in and take the place. It wasn't going to go that way because of what happened in the 30s and 40s. Now, in 1951, the Necromaton and Dramis begin to make deals with the Jehovian Anunnaki. Now, usually Necromaton don't want to talk to anybody, and the Jehovians don't either. So they had something in common. They didn't like anybody else but themselves. So they decided to make a deal, because they're watching this happen. They're watching the Dracs take over, and they don't like the other Anunnaki groups. So they're thinking, you know, by the time we're supposed to activate our APIN systems, we're not going to be able to activate them. They're going to take them over. So there were deals made between the Necromenton Andramis and the Dove Matrix, which are the ones that were associated with the Enoch teachings before, the Jehovian bipedal dolphin people of Sirius A, Arcturus, and Trapezium Orion. All right. So the Necromenton Andramis had already gotten control. Like this happened right before. This happened in Atlantis, right before the fall of Atlantis. Our grid that was called the Golden Eagle APIN system, that was taken over because the temples it was controlled from were taken over by Necromenton Andrami races then. They had literally held control of our Golden Eagle grid, and they called it the White Eagle, kind of like thumbing their nose at us that, oh, we're the Christos Eagle now. These are the false Melchizedek priesthood guys. And most of them, a lot of them anyway, are Nephilim, which were, if anybody's read Voyagers Volume 2, the original copy, we talked about Nephilim as being a race that during seeding 2 of the angelic human lineage here, there had been Anunnaki invasions, and they came in and they forced themselves on women here, and they created a race of, in the Bible they're called a race of giants, because they were much larger than regular humans. And the Nephilim were kicked off this planet by the guardian races, and they were like sent to Nibiru and wherever the heck else they wanted to go, but they weren't allowed to be here anymore after we got the territories back at the beginning for seeding 3. So there were all sorts of treaties even then that were going down. This is a very long history of war that we're part of. But so these guys make deals. You have Necromenton Andramis that have their White Eagle grid, and you have the Jehovian Anunnaki with their Dove grid. So this is where you have the eagle flying with the dove. All right, these are these deals. They started in the 1950s. What they wanted to do was they wanted to be able to open the Phoenix wormhole. That was the one that was positioned below the Falcon wormhole, right, literally on the same vertical, but right below it, the one that's right off the coast of Florida, where the other one's right off the coast of South Carolina, up a little bit from it. These guys over here. So these guys wanted to open this wormhole, because this one was already open, and that's the Falcon one that the Zeta guys were using. So they wanted to open this one and get their matrices running. If they could get the Phoenix wormhole open, they would be able to start activating the Dove grid and the White Eagle grid. So they could start fighting for dominance of the planetary grids to stop the invasion and the draconian agenda Zetas. This continued literally through the 50s, through the 60s. The Dracs remained in control till 1972. In 1972, it was getting to the point where all the Anunnaki were freaking out because the Dracs just had such a hold on things, and they were determined that even if they had to help each other, you know, the groups of Anunnaki that don't like each other, they decided, well, if we have to stick together for a little while just to get rid of these guys, we'll do it. What they wanted to do was they wanted to open that wormhole and close the other one. That was what they were hoping to be able to do. Open the Phoenix, close the Falcon, now we've got it, that kind of thing. You know, meanwhile, we're all like, you know, by this time, most of us were on planet and, you know, getting raised and watching things like Leave It to Beaver on television and, being fed this illusion of what life is really about. Well, meanwhile, this chaos has taken place underneath the government. And at the same time, we're being taught in America, we're being taught the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and we're raised with this wonderful bubble of emotion about being American. You know a song that still just makes me want to cry or smack a Zeta? It's the one that goes, I'm proud to be an American, 'cause at least I know I'm free. Well, at least we thought we were free. You know, there's something horribly sad about that. And I look at the people, a lot of people that get upset with the work that I bring out are people that have been in the military. How can you say that about our government? Wait a minute. Listen to what I'm saying. Most of you guys are good guys that give your life for that American Constitution. I know that. I didn't say you were doing this. You know what I mean? Because there's that reaction. America meant something. Conceptually, at least, we were led to believe in America, that this was the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we stood for freedom and justice and rightness. And what is so sad is that's what the people stand for, but it hasn't been the reality of what's been taking place in the governments. So meanwhile, we go and worry about who we're going to vote for next November, and we worry about, watch those returns and see who's going to be the politician up there. When it hasn't mattered since the 1930s. Because you're going to have one of two choices. You're going to have Drac, or you're going to have Anunnaki candidate. Pick one. What does it matter? They both want to take over the place. And the people who are the candidates don't know that. Okay, the people who end up playing the puppets to this, they don't know what they're playing the puppet to. They're doing their roles, we're all doing our roles, and meanwhile, there's these little guys directing things behind the scenes. This is what we've been living. This was like devastating to me when I started to see all the pieces. And what really hit home was how they explained that since the 30s and progressively through the 40s, 50s, and in the 60s it even increased, where the Draconian races, the Zeta races on behalf of the Draconians, were progressively playing with technologies to take out large numbers of humans without being detected as the ones who did that. They created ethnic viruses that were to go after just specific types of people, races that had certain gene codes where they wouldn't affect others, but they would affect those. Indigos were on the list. Humans were on the list. Illuminati, only competing types, were on the list. All right. They were using targeted sonics to create earthquakes, to create natural disasters, to see how far they could go with it. This was all being done covertly. And some of the military people that found out that things like this were actually going on and tried to do something about it vanished conveniently. They would be taken out. They would literally disappear. All of a sudden they got assigned someplace in active duty and got killed. Can't find the body. Or got blown up in a helicopter. No body left. Just a little bit of ashes or some bones. There have been things going on beneath the surface of this that have been horrendous. They've been really horrible. And we've been living our little American dream bubble as if everything's okay. That's why I think for, at least like in Europe and things like that, people from Europe, they've seen a lot. Their governments have been around for a very, very long time. And the people I've just, like with Michael and the people I've met by being over in England with Michael, they're just a lot more aware in certain ways. They're not as easy to put one over on. They don't have any more left of that little bit of innocence that somebody says, oh, well, it's this way. They don't mean, they say, okay, is it? All right, I'll listen. What do you have to say? Here, we're going to, okay. And if it's something that sounds good and really plays our heartstrings, and our government says it, there's still it's like a knee-jerk reaction from a lot of America, where because we want to feel that what we're believing in is really true, we will believe it, even when it isn't. And it's like taking a child that still trusts you and misleading that child and letting the child think you're doing something good for it when you're really like leading it off a cliff. That's what's been going on here. So I think this type of material is more, it's harder, I think, probably for American audiences more than anybody else, because we've been spared from any visible sign of fighting for a very long time. We've had nothing to worry about except for like becoming 30-something and having a nice house and maybe becoming a yuppie and being able to have a decent job and, basic stuff, feeding your kids. What we feed our kids here in a day would support families over in impoverished countries for a month. We've had this ability to become very trivial because there was nothing of huge importance that threatened us in any way, that we had to do anything but kind of like indulge ourselves, which was good. It gave us a time to kind of explore and stretch and learn things. But when you find that kid that was allowed to play, and they think they're in a safe playground, and all of a sudden they find out that there's a bunch of terrorists with guns pointing at that playground, who's going to be more prepared to deal with it? The people who have been watching buildings blow up because of the IRA, because of other terrorist groups. England has been a target for IRA activity for a long time. So the people get seasoned, and they learn to not crash when it comes to the emotional chaos of trauma. Right now, we're facing a situation, we just got our first dose, and I think we went from like grade 5 to probably a sophomore in college, all in one leap emotionally, as far as dealing with how we're going to deal with trauma. We're doing really good, actually. But this kind of stuff, when we start to realize that it can make you very angry, because at least in other places, like in China, people know they're not free. At least they know this. They know if they say too much, the government will come make them disappear. They will get put in concentration camps. At least they know the game. it's not better than this. We got to run around thinking we were free. So it's kind of neat. It's kind of like, do you ever see those hamster balls? My daughter has hamsters, and they have these little round balls that you can put the hamster in, and it can go exercise. It never leaves the ball, but it can like run around the whole house and not get lost, right? I keep wondering, is this exercise or torture? The thing seems to like it. We've been like that, in a way. We're running around in our little, hamster ball here.
Right.
Well, yeah, and we think it's all cool and all right. We don't even realize we're in a hamster ball, that we're really not free. So there's been a greater level of deception here. At least the countries who, their people know they're being dominated. They don't like it. But they learn that this is a part of life they're going to deal with. At least it's honest. Here there's a betrayal sense, because we thought we were dealing with honesty. It was something that was above the board the whole time. So there's a real sense of there's a lot of emotions when you start to see what's gone on here that can come up in you, and don't be surprised if they do. The first time you hear it, it may be like, yeah, I could probably feel that way. That's very different than when the feeling starts to come up. And it'll come up when you hit trigger events, when something happens again out there that brings up a whole ball of emotion, and you start to get in touch with it. There's a part of all of us that are hurting very, very deeply. It's on the subconscious level right now. It's the part that has felt so betrayed, like our great mommy and daddy government all of a sudden turned out to be child abusers. And we were so abused we didn't even know we were abused. It's at this point that we move into what became a fiasco from the 70s all the way up through to where we are now. It became an absolute fiasco between competing groups. The Draconians were in power, and the Anunnaki were really upset about this. So people who didn't like each other were starting to make deals with each other, which means the Illuminati, the human element here, they're the ones that look like humans, were getting dragged all over the place. There were factions here, and they'd be working against that faction over there. So there was an erosion that was starting to happen by the 70s. In the draconian control, we had, Big Brother Drac was what we had for a long time through the 40s and the 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s was Big Brother Drac. All of a sudden, Big Brother Anunnaki is saying, we're going to get in on the picture. In 1972, the Pleiadian Nibiruan Anunnakis, now they're the ones that are like the Thoth Enki group, the Pleiadian Samjaze Luciferian group, these guys that usually don't get along with the Jehovian groups, and sometimes they get along with the White Eagle guys, the Necromaton and Dramis. They decide, all right, we've all got to do something about this. So in 1972, the White Eagle, which are the Necromaton and Dramis, and the Dove Alliance, they want to break through the cap on the wormhole, on the Phoenix wormhole. The Pleiadians agree to help them, and with the combined technologies that they have, when they combined all of their grids that they had activated, like their APIN systems, they all had them activated to a small level, but they couldn't get them to activate any further, not enough. Not one of them could have done it by themselves. They all got together, and they did. In 1972, they blew the cap off the Phoenix wormhole. Now we had 2 wormholes running, and 2 competing groups working with them. It became even stranger. Now it was really funny. When you first started to see the Anunnaki infiltration, they didn't have their wormhole activated yet, but they had managed to get some of them through the Falcon wormhole, because that wormhole connects to Phantom Earth, but and Phantom Earth is connected to other star systems there. So they managed to get some of their races in here to start getting control back over the place. And wait, I was going to say something. I just got sidetracked. I'm getting told to hurry up. Okay, sorry about that. That was I might as well introduce you. When you see me do that, like somebody just tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, would you mind?" This is what happens. There's a person named, his whole name is Ma'ahuate. He's one of the Inner Earth Iani guys. This is one of the ones that was assigned to me to assist me with translating this higher level of stuff off the plates, because some of this is very difficult to translate into English. And once in a while, he's always with me. He kind of like monitors what's happening here, and we all have groups associated with us, because, like I said before, you have an inner Earth self, and I have an inner Earth self. We have our own incarnations in there. We have them right now in there, and this one isn't mine, but he knows the me that's in there. So we have a whole collective of helpers. And they're not helpers that, how in the channeling movement they say, go find your guide. No, they don't want to be guides. Helpers are a good thing. But guides tend to be those that come into your field and start messing with your DNA while they're telling you, that they're helping you. You don't need a guide, but it doesn't hurt to have some friends that know what they're talking about and that you can trust. the Eoni groups of Inner Earth are very trustworthy, and there's a part of us that knows them, and they will contact. If you have a friend there, the you that's there has a friend, it's usually the friend that'll contact you and let you know about the you, because it could be very confusing if you contacted you and you looked like you do here. You wouldn't know who you were talking to. Yeah, I'm talking to myself. Because what's really funny is ourselves in Inner Earth do look like we do here. We also have one on parallel Earth that looks like we do here. And our other incarnations in the different time vectors have their sets of selves. So anyway, when I have that little, excuse me, it's a frequency that comes in over here. Ma lets me know that he wants to say something, and he telepaths to me. And what he's saying tonight is wants to get down, because we want to get to the, he wants me to move faster, because he wants me to get down to what we need to do, which is at the end of this list. Okay, so I will do that. All right, I won't go on that tangent. All right, in the 70s. I was just going to say, real quick, in a nutshell, it came out. In the 1960s, that's when you started to see Anunnaki influence come in. You had the real rigid 50s paradigm. Remember how everything was pretty rigid in the 50s? That was Drakville. All right, that was like Pleasantville created by Drak. Then we had the Anunnaki influence starting to come in, and this is where we got wild and crazy, and everybody decided to go do drugs and have sex everywhere. All right, this was the Anunnaki, particularly Pleiadian Nibiruan influence, where they started a counter movement, and they literally moved it through people where groups of us were saying, I'm not going to be all rigid and stuffy like my parents were. I'm going to go and love nature and this. Now these people, these poor people that were loving nature by doing drugs, unfortunately, when you do stuff like LSD and the stuff that was real popular then, opening your fields right up. This was time to start possessing people, getting yourselves into people's bodies, right, into their fields. So the whole 60s movement, at heart it meant something good, but it wasn't used well. It wasn't used for good purposes. There was a lot of lip service to love and to freedom, but it was used in a way that was not about love or freedom. We were taught to use drugs in order to expand our minds. You don't need to use drugs to expand your mind if somebody's not grabbing your DNA and strangling it, because you would be able to expand your mind anywhere you want it to without them. So that whole movement was actually implanted. Just like now there are still movements that are pushing drugs on the streets. These are not just Colombian drug lords that are trying to make a buck. They're part of the chain of command. But who's really up there doing this are whatever fallen angelic group that knows it neutralizes people. It knows that if you do certain types of drugs that make expansions, mind expansions come, you're bringing in frequencies out of sequence, which is crushing your lower strand DNA templates, which is making it so you cannot activate and hold on your own that type of experience. So by getting the false version, the chemically induced version, you're literally, every time you do it, taking away your ability to have it naturally. And this goes for pot, too. A lot of people think, oh, well, the natural stuff's okay. Did you ever think about where those plants might have come from? Who'd they incarnate from? Some of the plants have medicinal purposes. Others, when they are used to create hallucinogenic experiences, or even that state of bliss that people can get when they smoke pot or something. When you get that state, it means it's doing something to your DNA to allow more consciousness to come in, which would come in normally if you already had the sequences between where you usually are and where you're going. If they were already filled in, you wouldn't need to take something to get yourself in that state. So there's a whole trickery that was launched during that period, where there's a lot of lip service given to, that's where the Christ consciousness stuff started, and that's where the drug movement and free love and all this somehow got woven up with being spiritual. Interesting. That wasn't really spiritual, but it allowed us to stretch in certain ways, which was at least beyond Big Brother Drak's control. So it could,
It was Drac and roll, wasn't it?
Drac and roll? Yeah. Yeah, it's like drugs and Drac and roll. Right? All right. So when you start to see the influences behind some of these movements, it's like that romanticism that was attached to the wacky and wild 60s and early 70s, where everybody's partying and you had everybody playing music and totally stoned, and wow, it was just amazing how stoned people could be and still like sing and still pick a guitar. It was just really amazing. Some part of them must have kicked in. But underneath all that was part of the setup. But that was the Anunnaki setup. These are the same people that have been moved into the more mature now New Age movement. These are the ones that became the channels, or their children became the channels. All right? With the Drac end, these are the guys that got moved into the UFO movement, what became the UFO movement here. You know, the ones that are too rational for that spiritual fluffy head stuff. They don't listen to that. They don't want to hear about souls and things. What they want to hear about is, where is that saucer land? You know, where did it go? All right, where are they hiding it? What hangar are they hiding that flying saucer in? Or, let's go out and sit in a field until we freeze our butts off all evening, hoping something comes down to visit. Oh, come on. You know, I mean, I don't mean to pick on people that do this, but you don't have to sit in fields and wait for them, because they're probably not going to come anyway, and if they do, they're not going to be the friendly ones. They'll just pretend. So there's this whole thing that has evolved out of this that took us up, just in our culture, to where we are now. And then you have basic mainstream people who are caught somewhere between the freedom and the constraint of the 50s and 60s, and have tried to like find a little narrow path that became like the 80s, where let's focus on business. Let's like start, you know, toning down our clothes. We don't wear psychedelics anymore. We're too mature for that now. And everybody became like Wall Street. That's where we all became professionals, you know? The Anunnaki had a lot to do with that, actually. The Necromaton more than anybody. This is where they started to get their influence on the scene, where you had your wild and crazy, psychedelic-clad, druggy Anunnaki people. Then you had your very rigid, very afraid of everything, or people from the 50s type mentality. Then there was this interesting blend of the two. It had kind of the freedom and the creativity of the Anunnaki, but it also had the rigidness and the control of the Drak. Perfect blend. And that's where our 80s came in. The cultural wars that have been set here are literally coming out of the agendas that were being run by these fallen angelic groups. Now, once the wormhole was opened, the Phoenix wormhole was opened in 72, it was like, game on, guys. Now, at least you had two balanced forces. Before, the Draks had too much control. Now it was going to go into power struggle. Okay, in the 1980s, the Zeta Regalians make a deal with a group of the Necromaton Andramis. Now you have Draks making deals with the Necromaton, where before the Anunnaki, Jehovians, the dove, made deals with parts of the Andrami Necromatons. So now you have the Regalians making deals with other parts of the Necromatons that favor the Draks rather than the Anunnaki. So it's getting even more interesting. All right, in let's see. Okay, so they make something called the Regalian Andrami Alliance was formed around 1982, 1983. That's where you had Falcon and White Eagle and Dragon Alliance, where before you had White Eagle and Dove Alliance. So you're seeing these guys hooking up as far as who's going to have control by the time we get up here. 1983, the Montauk Project was launched. In this project, basically what was done was what was called the Phi X wormhole. That's the one that was created through the Philadelphia experiment in 43, and that was linked into inner Earth. I mean, not inner Earth. It was linked into Phantom Earth. What they did in 1983, this was after the Drak guys of Falcon got involved with the Andramis. Through the Montauk Project, they plugged the Phi X into the Andrami holdings, not just into Phantom Earth, but into Phantom Alpha and Omega Centauri, which left all sorts of other doorways open for all sorts of other things to come through. So the Montauk Project took place in 83, and at this point you have two big wormholes open and two smaller ones, the Phi X, which became really the Phi X Montauk. It was like, it really operates as one. Then you have all these APIN systems all over the place with different groups trying to get control of them, using as their main access point one of those two wormholes. Okay. 1983, the Guardians finally got in to the deal, and they finally were able. See, what was happening through this period is Guardians could not get communication lines in here. They couldn't get to people. They'd already tried to come in. The Guardians had tried to come in when the Zetas came in, and they tried to warn the governments here. And they said, look, they're both trying to invade you. All right, you want to get out of this. It's a lot bigger than this. They were trying to tell them about the Stargate opening cycle. They were trying to explain to them that you can't fight this with wars. You can't fight this with weapons. No, we're not going to give you weapons technology. What you need to learn to do is this. They were trying to teach them the mechanics of round tables. And what the governments wanted were weapons to blow up their enemies. So they told the Guardian races repeatedly, there were about 6 attempts made of physical contact, covert physical contact, with the head guys in the Illuminati that were making the contracts with the others. And repeatedly the Guardian races were told to take a hike. And if they didn't take a hike, that they'd literally blow them out of the sky if they tried to bring their spaceships in to warn the public. So the Guardians could have come in anyway. It would have created war in our skies, and we would not be here talking about it at this point. And what was happening through the process, there's a lot of indigos here. This was the Guardian's trump card. They knew that the indigo races were born on the planet and that there was a lot of us here now. High Council had come. The indigos 1 and 2 were here in force because we had to open the grids for the stellar activation cycle. The big thing was going to become, can they wake up fast enough without them getting hijacked by one of the other groups? So there's been a huge hijack the Indigos program going on. Get them into the false Merkaba mechanics. Get them into the UFO movement or the New Age movement. You see, those two movements have one thing in common. They both involve people who have a little bit higher strand activation where they're starting to have interdimensional perception. All right? Be it seeing UFOs and having abductions, or be it, on the other hand, having spiritual experiences and talking to pretty Palladian Anunnaki. Now, these two things are coming from the same place. They were snares that were set up to catch the people whose DNA was going to be activating, and the first people on that list would be the indigos, because their DNA with the higher strand content would begin to activate first. So literally the traps were laid to either get the indigos hijacked over into one of the Anunnaki false ascension programs or over into the UFO movement. And if you couldn't get them either way, then put them in mainstream. And where'd they go? They're having strand activations, they're having visions, they're hearing voices. Oh boy, you find a lot of them in padded rooms. All right? So these were literally snares that have been set culturally. And it's really nasty when you look at how this was contrived. This wasn't an accident that things evolved this way. It was highly orchestrated from behind the scenes. And just the magnitude of it, I get really aggravated when I look at it. That's where I get like in that smack a Zeta mood, you know? I mean, it's not just Zeta. I think it's smacking Anunnaki even harder at this point. But I don't smack people, so I wouldn't do that. But the urge there is like, how could you? That's terrible. How could you do that to anybody? You know, they don't look at it that way. They look at us as something to move around like they do anything else. If they're bigger and they think they're better, they have a right to do whatever they want to us. So that brings us past the Montauk experiment of 1983, and that again was August 12th of 1983 when that was done, using again the magnetic peak in the grids. Now the magnetic peaks work interestingly. You have a yearly magnetic peak at that time. You have, let's see, it's a 20-year magnetic peak, which are the ones they were using for these experiments. They had the 1943 one, then they did one in 83. There's a 10-year, a 20-year, 20-year stronger than the 10-year. Then there's a 100-year peak, where, you know, once on that date, once every 100 years, it hits a really peak cycle. That's going to happen on August 12th, 2003. So that's the point where they were going to go for their final, you know, like dominion. They were going to come in here, and whichever race was in control at the time was going to fully begin the process of expanding their wormhole through their APIN system to literally pull Earth's grids down into whatever matrix they were connected to. Now we have a real bizarre situation where all the ones that were going to rip Earth apart, literally trying to pull pieces of it, well, at least they'll keep it in one piece if they take it, because they're all working together at this point, because the Guardian races have made so much headway. They underestimated the indigos. They didn't think they'd wake up enough, and they thought they'd be able to hijack them enough to where they wouldn't get to the point where enough would get together, work with the DNA, where enough would listen to the Guardians. I'm glad I did. I had no idea what the scenario was, how big it was, and the fact that we were going into literally a war over this if things didn't work out. I would have been scared to death in the early days, you know, when I was first just learning and, you know, being a student of them. But at least at this point, I see why they were gentle with me. If they'd given me the whole thing all at once, I probably would have run for cover and, like, gone and called up an Anunnaki. You know, I would have gone and joined, maybe, you know, take the Course in Miracles or something. You know? And, like, even though I know Jeshua wasn't crucified, I can ignore that for a while, and let's just hang out with these guys, because I'm terrified of the other stuff. But fortunately, I was eased into it, which is a luxury that you guys really don't have. Okay? But also, there's more consciousness on the planet here, and you have... Your DNA is beginning to activate now, so you will be able to understand things faster right now than you would have 10 years ago. So that's something that we all have as a support system. Okay, when we get up to 1983, the Guardians initiated the Bridge Zone Project, which was they started to look at what was going down here, and they realized that if they didn't come in and complete and finish the Christos realignment mission that they had, you know, they've been trying to do since 22,003, 26 BC. If they didn't do it now, there wasn't going to be another stellar activation cycle because of what was being done to the planetary grids here. In the year 2976 AD, the planet was going to implode because of the stuff the Zetas were doing in the planetary grids. It was literally going to implode in Phantom. There wouldn't even be something to take out of Phantom to rescue. So it was now or never. So in 1983, the Guardians created the Bridge Zone Project. The Bridge Zone Project involves activating the old LPIN systems and of the four faces of man, and getting the golden eagle back, its integrity back, which means taking it back from the Necromaton races who turned it into the white eagle and are misusing it, getting these grids back and anchoring enough frequency into the planetary grids, D12 frequency, and we already got half that accomplished. We've already got the D12 frequency in here for the first time in 200,000 years, so we got half the battle won already. But we need to create these pillars of sound that come out of these particular APIN and LPIN systems that will link Earth's grids into inner Earth and then into this, they call the Miage time cycle. It's like a supporting network that as the stargates open and things start to get pulled down into the phantom matrix, there will be enough of the higher frequency holding in the grids because of being spliced into these other matrices that it will literally stop most of the planetary base from being pulled down into phantom, where they will be able to come in and close it. There will only be a small portion of Earth's grids. This is where in the original book, Voyagers Volume 2, they talked about the 3 tracks of time, 3 destinies that were going to separate from each other as we moved into this, through this stellar activation cycle. You had the phantom matrix cycle, the bridge zone cycle, which would take you into a future where we would begin to realize inner Earth exists. And it's not the place you find by digging. It's a 45-degree shift in angular rotational particle spin, right? And there was one more, which was the ascension cycle, where there would be certain parts of Earth's grids that would actually fully blend with Tara, its own, that's what it's supposed to do, how Earth would naturally evolve out of density 1 and into density 2, would be Earth's grids would raise to a high enough frequency and merge with those of Tara and literally become part of the Terran base. And the people who resonated, whose DNA was activated to those levels, would experience going through portals and ending up on a place that looked like Earth but was a lot nicer, and it would actually be in future time from where you started. So there are 3 tracks of time if the Bridge Zone Project works. The planetary grids are such a mess here now because of everything that's been done to them. There's no way you're going to get the entire planetary grids out of here. The phantom matrix part has never been healed. It's still a piece of the grids that have been sucked into the black hole, and if that black hole isn't closed, the rest is going. So what the deal here is, we get, if we can accomplish what the Guardian races are trying to do, the people on the planet right now will have 3 different places they can go. Some of them will go to phantom if they cannot activate DNA up to a certain level, a 4.5 level of what's called accretion, which is activation. That's 4th strand and half of the 5th. That's what you need to cross over into the inner Earth time cycles and to be able to live there and sustain it. This is why we've been doing DNA activation programs in Cathara healing, because these are the processes that will get your strand activation up. Now, if the Guardians didn't intervene with this and say, we have to do this now, we can't wait till the next stellar activation cycle, there's not going to be one here. If they didn't do it, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and the whole planet literally would be on its way heading into phantom, and it would implode from the processes because everybody was trying to rip the grids apart. They weren't just trying to pull it in. They were trying to pull it in 6 different directions. Okay, so the Guardians got involved doing the Bridge Zone Project. That means the Christos realignment mission has to take place now, come hell or high water, because if it doesn't, it's going to be both hell and high water. So they started. This is when I first had contact with. Now I had contact with various different groups of the Guardian races since I was 4, but in 1983 is when I was assigned to someone named Enoch. I knew the being from other lifetimes, but I'd never heard of him here. I didn't know there was a Keys of Enoch book. I didn't know anything about him, but I had an encounter where I was introduced, and I was told by the ones I was used to working with that, this is Enoch. He's going to work with you. He's going to be your guide for a while. He's going to show you some things, and he was teaching me about maps. Didn't know why then. Now I do. But so this is the period of time when Enoch went over, when he decided he was entering the Emerald Covenant. When he saw he saw what was happening here and why the Guardians were intervening. He agreed. He realized that the other agendas were not worth participating in because they were going to be a disaster. So this is when he got in on the Emerald Covenant, and they assigned him to assist me and other people too in learning. And he has some specialties that have to do with knowing where Jehovian grids are planted. So I started working with Enoch there. Now in 1992, the Pleiadian Nibiruans, which again are the Samjaze Luciferian ones from Anunnaki from the Pleiades, and the Toth Enki Zeta and Enlil Odedicron Anunnaki from Nibiru. They wanted to cap, and they tried to cap the Falcon wormhole because they were still competing with the Dracs. They started to get more power since 1972 when they opened their Phoenix wormhole. They were starting to get more power in the Illuminati. They were like the government flavor was starting to go on Anunnaki instead of Drac. So what they wanted to do to finally get final dominion over the Illuminati is they wanted to do what they didn't finish doing in 72. They got theirs open, but they never got the Falcon closed. So they wanted to close the Falcon wormhole to prevent these groups. They wanted to prevent not just the Zeta Regalians, but also the Zetas at this point were working with that group of the White Eagle ones, the Necromaton Andromes, and the Omicron Draconian groups, the Dragon groups. They wanted to go after them now because, remember, the Anunnakis had the NDC grid, that Nibiru Dodic crystal grid system, and the net. Now, these were their trump cards that they had been using. Well, once the Necromatons had gotten involved with the Zetas and the Dracs, they decided they were going to use their Falcon wormhole to take over the Nibiru Dodic crystal grid system. And there were certain wars that were being run where they were trying to get a hold of Nibiru, to get control over Nibiru, and what they call Wormwood, which is the false Nibiruan battle star that's connecting the Nibiru Dodic crystal grid to here. So there was these invasions that were taking place that had to do with Nibiru because they were trying to get control over the Nibiru Dodic crystal grid here. This is when the Palladians decided they had to close this Falcon matrix because it was going to be a real problem. If they lost their Nibiru Dodic crystal grid, that was it. They lost the game, and they were also going to lose Nibiru in the process. So then, let's see, what they did here, I can get tired with this. Okay. Now, what the Falcon group decided to do, they wanted to expand their wormhole to make it bigger, while these guys are trying to cap it. So these guys, in 1992, these guys use pulses. They're using sonics. Everybody's playing sonic games now, and they have enough of their own APIN systems activated where they can start playing some heavy sonics games. Now, Palladian Nibirans try to use sonics to cap the hole, and at the same time, because the Drac Agenda Falcon guys knew that the Anunnaki were going to do this, they at the same time blasted more frequency into the hole, expanding the hole, so the cap went through the hole. So it didn't cap the hole. And they expanded the Falcon wormhole. So this was a big problem for, the Anunnakis missed big time on that one. Oh, shucks. Now, this pulse was launched on August 12th, of course, of 1992. Now remember, these wormholes are right off the coast of, Florida, northeastern Florida. August 24th, remember Hurricane Andrew? That was the most devastating hurricane that's ever, hit this place, and it literally flattened the Dade County, Florida area. And there was some interesting stories in Nexus magazine about some horrible things that happened to people that were in there, and about body counts being played with, that it was much, much higher. And in fact, I read an article in Nexus. I don't know if this is true or not. It's just what I read in Nexus. But the woman described, she said she had lived there and she was part of this. It took her 3.5 weeks to get out where she could get medical treatment because they were not letting people out. They were keeping them quarantined. But she was watching mass grave scenarios being done, like literally bodies being heaped in trucks, just unidentified, that kind of thing. So that was her story. I can't confirm whether or not that's true, and I probably wouldn't want to get into that even if I could. But these are some of the things that sometimes happen. So I'm very careful to just skirt sometimes on issues that you don't have to go into detail in, because sometimes it creates battles where you don't win by winning them, But Hurricane Andrew was a direct result of the 1992 battle over, are they going to cap, are the Nibiruans going to get the wormhole capped, or are the other guys going to get it expanded? The Nibiruans lost that point, and the Falcon Matrix was expanded even larger. The wormhole was expanded even larger. 1992, this was interesting. The Palladian-Syrian agreements. All of a sudden, the Anunnaki groups decide, we're in trouble, we're going to lose our Nibiru Dodic crystal grid, because the Dracs were now getting, they had enough power in their grids, and they just expanded their wormhole even more. They were going after the Nibiru Dodic crystal grid. All of a sudden, the Anunnaki wanted to deal. Who'd they come to? The Emerald Covenant groups. We'll help you if you help us. Well, the Palladian-Syrian agreements emerged out of that. They were agreements with the Palladian Nibiruans, some groups, not too many, but a few groups of the Jehovian ones that were part of the Dove Matrix, but most of them did not enter those agreements. They didn't want anything to do with the Emerald Covenant. So we started to at least have something to work with. where the Pleiadian Nibiruan groups had a lot of access. They still had the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid, they still had the net, and they still had several of the main control temples in the Nibiruan crystal temple network. So if they were going to play fair, first they had to agree that they were going to hand all this stuff over to Guardian Protection once the stellar activation, once we knew if it was going to commence. So they promised they'd do that. And what we were going to do to help them, and it would help us too, was we're going to try to cap the Falcon wormhole, which would shut down the Montauk Phi X smaller wormholes and the Falcon matrix system. Okay, I think I need my next one.
Check is happening.
I've got 10?
You got 4 pages left.
Okay, I'll go fast.
That's what my husband said. He says you're not listening very well.
Probably not. You know me in time when I get on a roll. Anyway.
Right.
Is this the next page left? Do I have these? This looks like there's another page.
You tell me to hurry up.
Yeah, thank you. I was saying, wait a minute. And this is where, when we get into these periods, now from 1992 up, this is where the New Age movement went bonkers. All right, because you didn't know who was on whose side. I mean, you'd go to a group, and it used to be a nice group, and all of a sudden you go and have some really weird energy. So what is this? People were flipping between Anunnaki. Some were going into the UFO movement. Others would come back out of there. The UFO movement people were taught that not to be bothered with those wackies, that are over in the New Age movement. The New Age movement people were taught, oh, you're above that. They're so spiritually immature. They're creating this horrible reality of abduction and stuff for themselves. So they were totally polarized and turned against each other. Meanwhile, you have the New Age crew saying, I'm in Christ consciousness. And they're walking around judging the hell out of everybody else, patting themselves on the head for being in Christ consciousness when they didn't even know that they had 12 strands or that there was anything called D12 Christos frequency, but they were absolutely certain they already had it, so therefore they didn't need to learn anything about it. So this was going on in the New Age movement. This is the new flavor of things as they really begin to use these movements. The UFO movement got to be a riot. All of a sudden we have Zetas talking, we have all sorts of things where the things that didn't used to channel and talk, they used to like abduct you and do medical experiments on you, all of a sudden they became friendly. It worked for the Anunnaki, why shouldn't they try it? So we started getting Zeta channels, where literally there's one that like talks on one of the TV shows, one of the radio shows on a regular basis. I think they call it Zeta Talk. Everybody started talking and chatting, and everybody was saying something different. So if you go and look at these things, you go to workshops like on the UFO Expo circuit or even the New Age circuit, and you look at this stuff, and what the hell do you believe? Everybody's got a different story. That's the thing I walked into in 1999, because I wasn't a part of any of that. I was having contact all of my life, but I was never a part of those movements. In fact, I think it was after the book was written, it wasn't published yet. I was just in the process of getting a publisher, and somebody asked me to go to a conference with John Mack and who was the other guy? I forget. Another one of those in the UFO crew, where they're not the New Age guys, they're the other side, right? No, he's Bud Hopkins. It was a thing in Boston that those two guys were hosting. And that was the first time I'd ever gone to any of these things. And I thought, oh, this is good. I'll meet people like me, that know these things exist. Oh boy, it was a war zone as soon as I got into it. So as we're moving through from 92 on, 92 was interesting. In 1992, the Emerald Covenant races did managed to get a cap on the Falcon wormhole because the Pleiadian-Sirian agreements, because the Anunnaki groups that had entered the Pleiadian-Sirian agreements allowed the Emerald Covenant races to use the Nibiruan dotted crystal grid and the grids that they still had control of, and we had Stargate 6 and the higher gates. So when you combine them, it made a very powerful frequency that they were able to put a cap on the Falcon wormhole. Now, the Zetas and the Dracs were not happy about this at all, and this is when politics got interesting again, because this is where we had a change in office again, where who was the Drac president? Now we have an Anunnaki president. These things were switching back and forth. Once in a while you'd have like a Drac president and an Anunnaki vice president, where they weren't sure which way it was going to go, so they'd play both sides just to make sure they were both represented. But, and I don't like to name names, so I won't say which president was which, but I was joking with Michael in the car. I think it would be funny to start from President 1, Washington, and just go up the line and see if there was any humans in there. Anybody that was working a human agenda, just to see. I heard we had a couple. And I think I know. There's two that I could place that I could think possibly had a human vibe because they had a humanitarian. Yeah. I won't even touch that one. Yeah, to anybody around World War II, I won't even go near that one. Okay, yeah, that was one of the ones. I mean, I haven't checked, but I felt this person had a heart that felt different than the others. And way back, not somebody I ever knew, but just getting a feel off a person, I kind of liked Lincoln, but he felt like a Palladian. But he still seemed to have his heart in the right place. So, I don't know. But, anyway, let's get back to this so we can get to the end where it's most important. All right. So we did manage to get the Falcon wormhole closed then. Between 1994 and 1998, the Anunnaki gained dominance again. Okay, they start taking over the Illuminati, and our guys let them, because what they were supposed to do was come in and say, okay, this is how it works, guys. Your little Drac buddies are gone now. Now you're dealing with us. We're doing the Emerald Covenant. This is a freedom agenda. This is what needs to be done. They were supposed to get the Illuminati ready for official disclosure of presence, to let the publics know globally that contact had been made, and to come clean about all of it. And they were supposed to begin preparing us for, as a planetary nation, being welcomed into the Emerald Covenant. And once that occurred, there would have been representatives sent. The Maharaji from Sirius B would have been the first guardian contacts to come in. And it was supposed to be our guys coming in with certain of the Palladian Nibiruan ones that were in the Palladian-Syrian agreements. We're going to come in, and we were going to take it from there, fix the grids together. They were going to let us, they were going to hand over the Nibiruan data crystal grid technology, because that has been messing these grids up for a long time. We were going to be able to recode that technology to a 12-code pulse and use it to heal the grids fast, so this stellar activation cycle would go smooth. It was supposed to be a new age of enlightenment for everybody. Yeah, right. Well, that was all a nice idea until 1998, when the grids raised to a certain degree in frequency, and it became apparent that, yes, a stellar activation cycle would take place. That meant, oh boy, the last hurrah. They had entered these Palladian Syrian agreements only because they were backed up against the wall, and they weren't going to win, so they figured, well, we'll side with those guys. Once it came down to, we helped them get back in a position of power over the Dracs, because they had entered the agreements, where if it went into stellar activation, this is what we were all supposed to do. They were immediately supposed to turn over the Nibiruan data crystal grid to Guardian protection, and it was going to be used to help people rather than to hurt people. They were going to help us get our DNA ready for what we were going, the stellar activation cycle. Well, when, as they say, the arc sparked, which means a certain set of frequencies was released from the planetary grids that meant stellar activation was occurring, 99% of them bailed out immediately of the Palladian Syrian agreements. They broke them and decided they were going back to the Luciferian Covenant agenda from Atlantis, because now they were back in power. We helped them get rid of the Dracs, and now they were just going to get rid of us. So what they did was all of the communication lines and access lines that they had allowed us to have to the Nibiruan data crystal grid that we had been using to begin to communicate with people and to begin to wake the Indigos up, they shut them down. They shut down our access on them. So it became very difficult for anybody to hear the Guardians when they were coming in. And again, it was back to the old thing. If we come in with spaceships, what's going to happen? Star Wars, and they're going to flatten everybody. So it's been very interesting since 1998. There's been a whole series of almost you step, we step, you step, we step action going down. We've accomplished a lot since that time. That's why we're at the point in time we are now, where there is direct, almost head-to-head conflict coming down, because the Guardians were successful to the point where it doesn't look like any of them were going to win this round, because we were going to get the D12 frequency seal on the planetary grids, which would neutralize every one of the Illuminati One World Order agendas, just like that. Now, in 1999, let's say, I think we did that. Yeah, we did that. Okay, 1999. I have to go through this one and go back to the Palladian Syrian agreements. Okay, 1999, our guys were trying to negotiate with the Anunnaki races. Come on, guys. You don't want to do this. You really don't want to do this. It's going to be messy. You're not going to get what you want anyway. Can't you be nice for once and trustworthy for once? Please, we should have known better, because historically they have always gotten in when they could use us, and then when it was served, when they got power from being in association with us, then they would turn on us right at the crucial moment. And they did it again. And at this point, they decided to the ones who, let's see, wait a minute, somewhere in here, 1998, let's see, I don't know if I have this on the list. At one point here, they started activating. Here we go. Yeah, there's the one I'm looking for. All right. Meanwhile, you have the Drac agenda guys, the Zetas and the Necromaton and Dramies that are working with the Zetas and the Omicron Draconian races. They finally figure out how to generate enough frequency from Phantom Earth to blow through the cap again. So they knock the cap off the Falcon wormhole. So we're back to the whole mess again, where we have now the Anunnakis coming in, we have the Draconian guys coming in. Also got a lot of reinforcement of the Omicron at that point. Rather than just having the Zetas be their little foot soldiers, they literally brought presence of the Omicron dragon moths on planet, and I've seen them walking around in people's fields. Some people that are working with like the Draconian reptilian agenda stuff. Okay. Let's see. Anything I have to need here? I'm going to scan these fast because if I take this much time on each of them, we won't get where we need to. Okay, so basically, the stuff was happening through the New Age movement and the UFO movement. You had the Dracs go in the New Age movement, the UFO movement, and the Anunnaki taking the New Age movement, and everybody's again trying to activate their APIN systems. This is where, all through this period, from the 70s on, you had people being guided to sacred sites to do ceremony. You know, it all just became totally, like everybody, all through the 80s, everybody's doing sacred sites. They didn't know who they were doing them for. Whoever they were talking to, whatever angel told them to. I mean, they were being sent in to activate the APIN systems of whatever group was working with them. And they thought they were there to heal the earth and do these kind of things. What they're there, excuse me, put your DNA here, would you please? So we can run this frequency through it. This is what was going on. And the people are good-hearted people that really just want to help Mother Earth and all that, you know, that nice, sweet kind of feeling, that light love and you can't afford to be clueless anymore feeling. Yeah. All right. In 1999, we were warned that it might go this bad, but it was not time to start scaring people with information like this, okay? Because there was still a chance that it might go well, where we didn't have to have these conversations. In 1999, we were given a classified document of, I forget how many pages, maybe 50 pages, that got into a bunch of stuff, but one of the things it got into was that in 1999, I believe it was the Zeta, the Draconian agenda groups, the Falcon groups, began to use psychotronic pulsing to begin to stir up. There's a way that you can use psychotronics where you can literally stir up the fight or flight instinct in people. You can create conflict between people. We got whammied with this in Florida when we got hit with psychotronics on the beach down there. The whole group got hit with it, and we tried to absorb it to protect the group, and we ended up screaming at each other. It was bizarre. I mean, so, you know, afterwards, I go, what the hell? What was that? You know, we're so like,
Say that again. Huh?
What? Yeah. Well, imagine this kind of scenario. Imagine that you're with your brother, your sister, or your partner, and all of a sudden this frequency gets run through you. Neither of you know a frequency has been run through you, but it hits your second DNA strand, which is connected to your emotional body, and it throws this chaotic frequency up. And what it does is if there's any patterns, any miasmic patterns from your karmic pattern from other lifetimes in there, it blows them right up in your face and they come out your mouth. And it's like really bizarre where you end up, and the emotion's right there. Like, why are you mad at me? I don't know. If you really stop and think about it. But the thing is, these work so fast that you don't usually stop and think about it. It takes a lot of field control, especially if they're heavy-duty pulses. Now, what was done in 1999, there were 3 pulses set out. Well, actually, there were 3 sent to the United States, into areas of the United States. Let's see if I can remember all of them. One of them was the Sedona Vortis area. One of them, I think, was the Gruol. I forget. That's in the book as far as specifically where in the States. But there was 3 in the United States, 1 in Jerusalem, and 1 to China. Now, these are pulses that are meant to stir up issues in people and in collectives of people. These are the things that they were targeted. Now, these are slow pulse. It's called a slow pulse technology, which means it hits you, but it doesn't immediately, usually, unless it's a really powerful one like the one we hit on the beach. Most of them are made to be sent here, and then 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, build in your fields until then they erupt. Now, these were scheduled to go off between 2002 and 2003 in the U.S., China, and Jerusalem. It was meant to set in motion an interesting set of events. But because things were going so well on the Guardian side, they found that they had to expedite things because we had made a lot of progress from that time forward. Now, in January 1st, 2000, we had a major victory that we had no idea what a major victory it was until after the fact. A bunch of us got together on the beach in Siesta Key. This is the area of the Gruau point, which is the control point for the planetary shields, for the planetary grids here, Stargate 2. We were asked to do certain things. We used the Song of Orion, which are a set of frequencies, and we didn't even know how to do roundtables. They hadn't taught us roundtables yet. But we were using, we did a kind of funny little ritual dance circle thing, singing the Ome Da song around on the beach and running frequency. What we didn't realize how important at the time was we were helping, we knew, to ground the stellar bridge, to help bring in that pillar of frequency that was going to come down from, literally it comes out of the solar gate, but it's connected to this whole lineup of stargates that go from the sun, up. And we helped to anchor that. And I figured, that's a good thing. We didn't realize that it hadn't been given to us before. This is real important because it hadn't been done in 200,000 years. We had anchored a 12-code pulse in the grids for the first time since 208,216 BC. And I guess they didn't tell us ahead of time how important it was because they probably thought we would have been scared and wouldn't do it right and would mess it up. So they just kind of said, would you help to anchor this? Yeah, okay. And later, same thing happened on 5/5/2000 when we actually released the codes to bring the Templar, the whole, which is like all of the certain, there's like a connection points throughout the planetary grids that go with the Cathara grid, just like you have in the Cathara healing course. We show the 12 points in the body, the Cathara grid in the body. Well, the planet has its Cathara points, and it was time to wake up the Cathara grid in the planet on 5/5/2000. And again, a whole bunch of us assembled there. I wasn't even doing a workshop, but a whole bunch of people came anyway and decided, well, we're here. It's 5/5/2000. We know that's an important date. So we came down the beach. And it was one of those workshops that drives me crazy because I didn't have a workshop, didn't know I was doing a workshop, but then I found out I was doing a workshop. And I was given little blocks of information. Okay, now guys, go down the beach and do this. And we'd come back up and I'd be on the computer again, getting the next batch. The whole weekend went that way. That was when we found out later. It was the happy birthday party for the Planetary Templar. We brought it back into 12-code activation. Now it was just a matter of getting critical mass frequency of 12-code in. So we had accomplished amazing things there, totally naive, like little kids, not realizing that we were part of something really major that had to do with big, scary stuff like these guys either, this stuff. But we had a lot of accomplishment there. This is why there's a chance now. If we can get enough 12-code pulse in these grids, get these things cleared out of the grids by 2003, before 2003, and now, add to the list, if we can stop them from joining those two wormholes together to make a big one between end of December and beginning of January, of this year transition, we will be able to fulfill the Christos realignment mission, which means all those horrible things in Revelations don't have to come true as far as the Jehovian seals. As they release, we are clearing them. The roundtables are helping to do that. Roundtables work because we each have a body that has the ability to run D12 frequency in little nanosecond bursts. It looks like, you know how those little twinkle lights are that you put on Christmas trees and stuff? Well, they flash on. It's not that you run 12 D12 frequency and it's running through like this. It isn't. Little poof, 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 little on-off flashes. But it's enough to spark it in the grids and to build that frequency in the grids. The solution is so easy compared to the complexity and the hugeness of the problem. Okay, we're right down to the last one here.
Not quite the last one.
It's not the last one yet. Oh, Lord. Well, if we're going to be here till midnight, I won't do that to any of us because I have more stuff I have to do for you for tomorrow. Okay.
We've got 9, 10, 10, I think.
Okay, you know what I'll do here? What am I on? I think what I'm going to do, because this is taking us into some stuff that I would like to spend a little bit of time on. So I think I'm going to go back to page 9 tomorrow. What I will do is give a summary of what's on the last pages of this that basically gets into the situation that they're going to try to expand these two wormholes into one. There is our 8th planetary natural seal opening and its corresponding unnatural Jehovian seal 4 opening between the end of December and the first week in January coming up. This is what our Peru trip is about, to do roundtables there to assist, first of all, in stabilizing these frequencies as they come through the grid, and then to get enough D12 frequency, and more than D12. We're going to be running what they call the Triveca codes. We don't know how to do that yet. But what they do are, the Triveca codes are specific mathematical currents, or like programs, that allow the biofields and the planetary grids to open up the pillars of frequency between here, inner Earth, and the Miyar zone time cycle. All right, this wouldn't have been done until probably 2008 going into 2012. I mean, we wouldn't have had to do it if things were going normal. But at this point, if we don't, there is going to be a mess. If this is not successful, it's not going to be a good place to live on the East Coast of the United States. You know, in fact, if you want to live on the East Coast of the United States, you might want to go in 1 or 2 states toward the Mississippi, because you'll probably have nice coastal property. This is how serious this is. These wormholes are right off the coast of the United States, down in Florida. I mean, I live in Florida. It's like, oh boy, underwater wonderland. You know, we just got a house down there. It won't only affect there. There will also be massive quaking down in through Peru and Chile and various other areas, and this will only be the beginning. I didn't even take it in this paperwork as far as, okay, and after that happens, if it goes wrong, because at that point, it's not even worth looking at. Just look at biblical revelations. We have 7 angels and 7 trumpets, and every time a trumpet blows, something horrible, more horrible happens. Then we have 7 more angels, nice angels, these guys, I tell you, with vials, and then we have plagues and the woes. All right? I mean, you go through this whole series of horrible, torturous things, and believe me, if that was the only God to choose from, I'd choose to walk away, because that's not nice stuff. If your God is so judgmental, they're just going to throw this stuff at you just because you didn't know how to serve the way you were supposed to? Give me a break. This isn't about God. It's about real stuff. It's in Revelations. I suggest getting a Bible and checking out the story of Revelation if you don't have it already. It'll give you an idea. And just remember, when they talk about angels, they're talking about technologies. When they talk about trumpets, this is a specific type of technology I'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow that creates a waveform. You can literally beam it light years, and it creates a waveform at the end that spreads out like a trumpet, like the horn of a trumpet, and it has the ability to do this to the molecular structure, to the core template of things, and make it shatter, so things can literally disappear if you run the right frequencies. Or you can blow holes in things, which these are the things that they used to open the spiking grids beneath the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And they're probably still going to go after Philadelphia because it's part of the network. But the main thing, there's spiking grids all through like Philadelphia, Atlanta. But right now what their main concern is keeping us distracted, people in general, distracted, and working on getting those 2 wormholes opened into one. So their big events are going to take place at the end of this year and the beginning of next year. There's probably going to be more terrorist activity between now and then. There's probably going to be more grid spiking, but they said something interesting. They said with the grid spiking at this point, they couldn't exactly do terrorists every time they needed to spike open one of the grids. See, the reason terrorists were used this time was they had to get those things open fast, and they knew that with the type of pulse they had to send, there was a very good chance it was going to make the buildings crumble, or at least partially. And if they did that in Washington and in New York City at the same time with no apparent reason, it would make people think. There's enough people that are aware the government has been testing with sonics out in the Atlantic Ocean, because there's been dead things like fish washing up on the beach, like whales getting beached because of it, because it's messing up their own, sonic radar stuff. Now, there had to be a cover. What's going to be the cover for the other ones are going to be, if they have more time and they know, okay, we have a month and we want to get that one, they are going to go back to the programs that had been testing throughout the 50s, 60s, and actually 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, which were the climate issues, where if you can flatten some things using a tornado or a hurricane or a localized earthquake, if there's a building or something that's going to go down because we have to activate a site under it and we need a cover, natural disasters are much less obvious. They know how to create these things. They have been practicing and doing target practice for 40 or 50 years here. So you will see more of that as the way that, you'll see other terrorist things that happen just to keep the battle moving, because they want to keep the battle moving.
Making war on countries like Iraq, which is going to happen.
Right.
We're good enough to do that as well. Doing terrorism
Oh, yeah.
in Iraq.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, being official terrorists. That's what we're going to be turning into. Michael was just pointing out that another cover for that. We have the natural disasters, and they've already said that they're going to use that quite a lot. So if you see, every time you see like something happen someplace, go, I wonder, if they had a spike grid there, or if it was one of the other, which grid was connected to that one? Because when I watch TV, that's what I see anymore. I see it. But he's also pointing out another way to go after grid spaces that might, if you just don't want things tumbling down with no explainable reason for it. War is another good way to do it. Like right now, if they were using sonics in Afghanistan, who the heck would know the difference? Nobody would know the difference. All right? There wasn't a whole lot to knock down there to begin with, but there are political motives on the one level, and they are political, to get control of sites. But you will also see, particularly if you see little skirmishes pop up, a couple little things get bombed, and then, like, Afghanistan's in a different category. But if you happen to see this war on terrorism move into a place where the coalition, the anti-terrorism coalition, goes in and say somebody was being bad about doing something that could be qualified as terrorist, and they go in, they just bomb a little bit, but then they leave them alone. You'll know that that was a site that needed to be activated, so they just used that as a cover. And plus, they want to advance us by 2003 into a global war state. That's what they're hoping to do. Now, our president really doesn't want that. That's really not on his personal agenda. You can't say Bush is doing that. He's not. He's just one of the little players on strings. And this applies to all other governments, even the Taliban. And personally, I think they're absolutely nuts, the way they treat people. They're barbaric. But then you look at what's inside of them, and it makes sense. So, anyway, tomorrow, with the information I want to cover tomorrow, I'm going to get the basic drawings done to show you where these APIN systems are and why they're called the silly names that they're called, which is also helping to remember. It makes it easier to remember them. We're going to talk a little bit more about the purpose and the function of roundtables. I want to explain, because other people got to explain to you, but I didn't get to explain my version of the roundtable talk. So we understand a little bit. What I like to talk about in the roundtables is the pillars that we're building, the pillars of frequency that we're building. I've also been told I'm going to be given something tonight that's a new technique to be put in with these that will take us to the next level, and it has to do with activating the four faces of man grid within our own bodies. And it's going to start, we can do this, we can begin to do it now, because the guardian groups are starting to do it in the planetary grids. And we're going to help them do it. As we help ourselves, it will actually help it to activate in the planetary grids. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. And tomorrow I also I'm hoping to have done there's one diagram, and the diagrams are wicked unless you want handwritten stuff, and I tend to be a perfectionist, so I try to have everything typeset and all that, but it takes forever. But there's another diagram I want to show you tomorrow that will show you on the body where the axiotonal lines are, and a lot of you have seen this diagram from either that manual or from the Cathar manual. But I'm going to show you where the Jehovian seals are located in the body. And there's going to be, whatever this technique is that they're going to give me between today and tomorrow, it's going to help us clear out of our bodies these things as they come up. Because they're not just something you can pull out like with psychic surgery. These are things that progressively come back. You'll clear off one level, and then it'll start to run through the planetary grids its next level, and it'll cycle, and it'll come back again. They're meant to keep coming back until they build up such critical mass frequency that they really shut down your body systems. So they're going to give us something to work with the personal issues. Also, to work with strengthening our fields. Because right now, it's like psychotronic pulse city out there. Everybody's beaming stuff at each other, and most of the ones, right now you have a lot of sonic, photosonic wars going down, which are a little bit different than plain old sonic pulses. They actually use them along electrical currents, like more light currents than sound currents. There's wars going down in frequency between the Omicron Draconian matrix, who did not want to join the United Resistance. So they're trying to make a final stand, like the Taliban's attitude. The reason they're taking that attitude is because they're being motivated by that force. They're going to get themselves stomped on because of it, because the United Resistance is much larger. So you're having these fighting things going on between those guys, between the United Resistance, which is the big group of a whole bunch of them, and the Drat groups that refused to be a part of that. There's a couple of renegade groups that are Anunnaki, ones that didn't want to get involved with anything, and they're just kind of floating around, not really knowing exactly what they're doing and trying to figure it out. So there's all sorts of stuff, frequency, floating through the grids at this point, floating through the atmosphere, floating through our bodies. We'll learn tomorrow some more techniques to strengthen our fields. So when psychotronics hit us, because we're walking through a psychotronic field at this point, and it's going to get worse, we need to be able to realize when the emotional stuff comes up, we got a first-hand dose of it. How they literally create a static field in your body, and it builds and it blows up, and you find yourself fighting about it. And if you step back and say, what the hell are we fighting about? I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. I forgot too. We have something in common. Let's take it from there. How this stuff can affect you from a subconscious level. is scary. So they're going to give us some technique to help us learn to process that. There's something in our bodies that has to do with the fight or flight instinct that is not a natural instinct for humans that's being played on. And there's a way to begin to shelter that and heal that so it can't be triggered on us because they're triggering it through the subconscious imprint. So we'll get into that tomorrow, and we will do a round table tomorrow. And I hope, like I said before, if we could do lunch outside, like a picnic or something like that, and just bring a sandwich, or they have the convenience stores with the sandwiches, just so we have more time, because I want to be able to get done with the most important stuff for the people who have to. One person has to leave at 5 because there's planes to catch, and some have to leave at 6:30. So I can't keep you up till 11 o'clock tomorrow night doing the same thing. So I hope you enjoyed this much and this far. And I hope you'll enjoy tomorrow as well. Thanks. Have a good night's sleep. I'm gonna kind of like launch into this without a lot of hello, how are you kind of stuff, because there are people that have to leave early, and I want to get the real important stuff done by like 5 o'clock, and then after that, and the people who have to leave after that, you won't miss the most important things that we're going to cover. And it's probably going to be one of those that, as people have to leave, they have to leave, and people stay, they stay, and hopefully we get out in time to have dinner sometime or something. But there's like no official end time of this workshop. It's just going to, if you have to leave, you have to leave. So I'll get the most important stuff covered first. And pardon me out of breathness. Okay.
The energy to do all this, do it. To go put all this together.
Okay.
And stay awake,
Right. Sticking together. Okay. Oh, this thing again. Okay, I don't know when I'm starting it, but I think. Okay, I think we'll probably start with, let's see. You can read this. Yeah, okay, I'm just going to leave these up here. This is the new code we get to work with.
Oh my God.
This stuff, I think, is what I want to do. Just get through first, so we can
get a chance to look at that map. Not now.
We could stick it up on the wall over there, couldn't we, though? The maps are going to be, like, we're working on a finalized smaller version to put in the books, but we literally just got the coordinates for everything. Yeah, like this week they were finally giving us the final, like, longitude and latitude lines and everything. So the maps are coming. That was the first one where we plotted it to see exactly where they were, so then we can make a smaller one. Okay, now, the most important thing of all of this that we can remember is about the APIN systems, all right? Because right now, what is going on the planet, all right, the APIN systems of the fallen angelics are being activated, and our guys are going to activate their APIN system. Now, I've talked about the fact that we had one called the Great White Lion, and we had one called the Gold Eagle, and we had one, the most important one, it's an LPIN system, a Lumerian technology that's more advanced than the Atlantean ones. It's called the Four Faces of Man. Now I'm going to show you the basic, what this looks like, basically, on the map. And the most important thing to know about the Four Faces of Man is, first of all, it has 4 faces to it, which you'll see what that means. There are also 2 other setups just like it, one on parallel Earth and one on inner Earth. What they do when they're all activated is they create standing pillars of inaudible sound that literally link the 3 planets together, and then those 3 planets can link into the primal light and sound fields, which gives literally an anchoring rod to the planetary shields, the grids. So there's going to be a point where after I get to this point, I'm almost starting at the end and moving back toward where I would normally begin in order to get the most important stuff covered, covered first. The things that are going to be activating in the planetary grid are also activating in our DNA and in our bodies. And this is why when we get to the Jehovah's seals, there's going to be problems if we don't know what to do with the frequency in our bodies, because they cause pain and they can cause more than that. What the Jehovah's seals were designed to do was if they all activate and nobody knew they were going to do it, they will literally kill you. They'll stop your heart because they're all around here. Now, we don't have to worry about that right now, but that would be like Seal 7, which is like next year sometime. But we're going to have it cleared before that. When we're working with the 4 faces of man grid, we're working with it in the planetary grids, but we're also working with it in our bodies. Just like the Jehovah's seals that are in the planetary grids, when they activate, they start to manifest in our bodies, so do the frequencies associated with the guardian grids. What it does on a personal level is, remember I talked about we have incarnations simultaneously in other time vectors, and that's literally our whole avatar self is put in a whole bunch of different bodies at the same time in different space-time places. Well, just like the 4 faces of man grid will link Earth, parallel Earth, and inner Earth into the primal light and sound fields to give the template support, this will do this on a personal level. It will link you to your inner Earth self. The link between your parallel Earth self has already been made by your inner Earth self because there was a crisis in parallel Earth. I think it was last year, 2001, I think they started, November maybe? November 2000, I think, is when they started to roll. They went into pole shift on parallel Earth because they did not get these things cleared in time. Now, on parallel Earth, they run ahead of us in the timeline by a little bit. And they were experiencing, I think it was at the end of last year, I'd have to look, there's so many dates to remember with all this, but I think it was like the end of last year or the beginning of this year, they started to go into their 2008. It was their year 2008. And what would happen here in 2008 was we were going to go into pole shift if these grids weren't cleared. In their 2008 timeline, they are rolling, and you can't do anything about it at this point. There were huge evacuations done from parallel Earth. People who couldn't make it through with their bodies, literally their consciousness it moved into their inner Earth bodies. So we don't have to worry about linking. There's some of you that know about the parallel Earth crisis. When I'm saying that we're going to be linking our own biofields and DNA template to the rest of ourselves, we're going to get online with the rest of our avatar consciousness, particularly the aspects in inner Earth, because they have the strongest frequency that can hold the rest of us together, which means when the planetary grids start to do weird things and our DNA starts to respond and do similar weird things, it will stabilize our DNA templates, it will stabilize our biofields, so we will be able to continue normal DNA activation and not get caught up in the negative spiral of things that's happening here. If enough of us do these things, it will actually affect the race morphogenetic field, which means if enough of us do it and do it with enough frequency, like enough frequency coming in, I don't mean often enough, I mean enough frequency coming in, we will literally make a difference in how everybody's bodies responds to what's going on the planet. We could literally make it so everybody could shift through out of the phantom matrix. Now, the 4 faces of man grid is, I'll show you what it looks like on the map. And these were like just done. I just got finished with this one this morning. And they will be more precise as far as like exactly where are we. We basically have things labeled Asia, North America, South America, Africa. Okay. All right. I'll get it in focus in a second. That's the first one I had on. Let me move this thing. Like, there we go. Okay. Okay. All right, now, they call it the 4 faces of man because if you look at one of these, right, it's just like the heads on Easter Island. There are 4 of them. These are grid lines, and they have all sorts of complicated grid lines, running through them. These are just the basic outline shapes. What they do is the heads don't just end. They actually make pillars that wrap around. If this is the globe, right? You have these continents here. They wrap around, and all 4 of those, if this kept going around the globe and this went around the globe and they did too, those 4 would meet like this on a place directly opposite here. Now, the point where their chins meet is the 0, 0 line. That's the 0 degrees longitude, 0 degrees latitude. And when you go around on the other side, you have 0 degrees longitude still and 180 degrees latitude. And I think it's called Howland Island. It's somewhere like out off here someplace. They would be in through here someplace. So I have to chart all those things. But at least when I talk about the 4 faces of man, LPIN grid, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. These are the places where all those little microchip implanted crystals are literally run through the planetary grids. And I don't know how far apart each one is, but as far as they'll probably actually give me that kind of data, like whether they're 5 miles apart or 10 miles apart or what. But when you link them all up, as if they were, if this was a dot-to-dot drawing, and you connected the dots, you would get the lines. So what they really are is they're little dots, which are the crystalline rods that are implanted to hold these frequencies and the programmings that go with them.